Well, Charles, welcome to a very special Sunday with Charles.
It's Superb Owl Sunday.
Superb Owl, exactly. I think that actually came out of QAnon. There's a little bit of a Twitter war going on right now between the pro-QAnon and the anti-QAnon people. I guess we'll have to see where that all lands. You know, Charles, I've heard a rumor. You'll have to tell me if this is correct or incorrect, but you've been nominated Grand Poobah of Germany.
I don't know about that, but yeah.
That's inaccurate?
that would not be factually correct. I did not send or receive that email. But
can we talk about it?
Yeah. Actually, in the last 120 minutes or so, we received word, you and I received word, that indeed elements within the government of Germany do want us to go over there and go to Berlin and address, I'm not sure it's the entire Bundestag, which is their parliament, but it is a collection of people there, and spend 3 to 5 days in Germany at their expense going through our findings on the Clinton Foundation. And I was, you know, you get these kind of emails and you wonder if it's somebody in, you know, Nigeria, you know, or whatever.
Deposit $40,000
yeah, exactly.
in the account.
But I called the number and I, you know, left a message, and within really seconds somebody came back on the line and claimed to be in Germany and seemed respectable. And I think it makes abundant good sense for the government of Germany to be quite concerned on 2 levels, as I explained to the person I spoke to. On the one hand, the government of Germany has touted its involvement with the Clinton Climate Change Initiative, and that's something we haven't yet pounded into smithereens, but we are going to do that. And because that Clinton Climate Initiative, I mean, you could say, let's say on this very cold day that climate change is an issue. I'm not competent. You know, I'm not a scientist. I don't.
Certainly pollution is an issue.
Right, but climate change, let's park that one. You know, we don't have to ask, how come, you know, the polar ice caps on Mars are also melting? Is that our fault as well? Or could it be have something to do with the sun, the intensity of the sun? I don't know. I mean, there's science in there that needs to be addressed. Let's assume it's real. If you're going to address climate change and do it in a way that's charitable, it might help to set up a charity that has the authority to do that in a given state, and then register, you know, get federal tax exemption, then solicit legally something they've never done properly. So unfortunately, it sounds really good, and in Germany, there's quite an appetite in Germany to address the issues of climate change. And it's a hot button issue, and so the German government, and I'm not sure whether it's the national government or regional governments or whatever, has made and touted contributions to the Clinton climate change thing, which doesn't exist, and therefore is a fraud. And in addition, sundry German corporations and banks have made high-sounding commitments at the Clinton Grifters Initiative, I mean Global Initiative. And again, that's a problem because under German law, I'm told, you know, you can only deduct certain things as business expenses, and, you know, giving money to something that isn't a charity is not really a business expense.
Sure.
And Siemens is one of the companies involved. Siemens, if you Google it and you follow Ortel's first law with the word fraud, I mean, we could do a show that would take the month of February to go through all the different things you might find there, which I gather it's spelled differently. S-I-E-M-E, not A-E, yeah, and fraud. Siemens guilty of global fraud, German corporation. He just goes on and on and on.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest electronics companies there is.
Well, and the problem, see, the problem with Siemens, and this actually is a neat segue, the problem with Siemens and the problem with GE and the problem with corporations, multinational corporations, getting in bed with governments to get long-term projects done is oftentimes approvals are required in the given national government. And oftentimes there isn't much of a difference really between the power generation equipment that GE produces and that Siemens produces. And so the temptation to grease palms to, at various levels, either directly as a corporation or the agents of these companies to do that, is what has gotten Siemens into trouble. And now on the question of GE, we've talked about this in the past. That was a company identified in 2006-07 as being a problem. It's back in the news now.
Yeah.
And I think this is, I honestly think this is a coincidence. Tomorrow I'm sitting down with an investigative journalist to talk from Germany, from a large German newspaper, to talk about two related topics. What did I see in GE, and what do I see in the Clinton Foundation? And we're going to increasingly, I think, going to start pairing those two matters. And the GE is enormously complicated from a financial perspective, far bigger than the Clinton Foundation. But justice seems to be coming at long last to GE. Managers haven't been held accountable. Directors haven't been held accountable yet.
But the stock tanked,
But the stock is, you know, it's a toilet bowl central. I mean, it's going, it's going, and it's not just the stock. Sophisticated investors look at the debt, and where you identify a difference between when the stock market thinks a company's hot, but the highly sophisticated credit investors who tend to be smarter look at the credit and say, this is rank, you know. You know, this is worse than the garbage bin up in Chappaqua after they get through burning files and bleach bidding them and drinking a bunch of Chardonnay.
Yeah.
It reeks. You know, on the debt side, you see those discords, those discrepancies, and it's actually a very interesting investment opportunity.
Well, you've spoken many times about the parallels between General Electric and the Clinton Foundation, or rather the comparison of your investigation of those two bodies. So with any luck, hopefully you'll be lacing up some German boots that will be used to stomp on the Clinton Foundation.
Well, in my experience, I've done some business in Germany, and once, you know, Ortel, in fact, is a German name, and believe it or not, my ancestor came from Berlin in 1853. John Berthold Ortel. So if this does come together, so I've never been there, so it'd be amusing to go there. And they tend to be, you know, not everyone's the same in every country, but German people can be sort of thorough.
I would think, yes.
And when you, you know, feel that you've been slighted, and the tone of the conversation with the guy I was speaking to, you know, he's all in, and they're following our work here.
And why wouldn't they be? I mean, this is a huge crime, public money in some cases if it's coming from the government and whatever. And I mean, yeah, I guess just people are like, hey, it's the Clintons. This is the president of the United States. He's doing a charity. Here's the money. Everybody wants to be on stage with, you know, Tricky Bill here and Hillary. You know, she is the most qualified presidential candidate in history.
Right.
And she looks so intelligent in that photograph.
Right. I mean, can you imagine if, you know, my favorite topic, if aliens landed on Earth and said, take me to your leader, and she was president? They'd just immediately leave.
Yeah.
We can't deal with this. But,
too crazy.
But anyway, so that's a good development, and I think it's going to be interesting to see, you know, why, I think there's now going to be a race on, or there may already have been a race on, as between federal government authorities, Arkansas state authorities, U.S. states, the IRS, and now these various foreign governments. I think before long it's going to be, you know, how come you guys didn't do anything about this?
And it's interesting too, because, you know, we did that show with Michael Smith, and then now there's a formal complaint with the FBI on behalf of the Australian government. Just 2 weeks later now, you've got an inquiry from the German government. As we go through these different countries today, of course, featuring France, as we go through these different countries, certainly the possibility exists that there could be, you know, one after the next, after the next, after the next. Many, many countries may become interested in trying to help Mrs. Clinton figure out what happened to all the money.
Right. Well, and so the virtue of doing it the way we've been doing it is that when you start to get a country like Germany that can print money and is, you know, a powerful country, you start to get its organs of state looking back into the files and saying, you know, in German language, you know, what files do we have about what the Clinton Foundation told us, you know, when we began to ask, what questions did we ask? What answers were we given? Where did the money flow? To what accounts? You start getting governments asking the Clinton Foundation and, you know, and having in their own files these papers, and you start cross-checking it. It's like, and I won't mention who this person is, but it's like what happens when you come home and you think everything's going to be great, you got everything organized, you happen to have, like Tiger Woods, 18 mistresses around the world, and you go into the kitchen and there's like 18 women in the kitchen, and they're all comparing notes. You know you're going to have a bad day. I think that's the same in a changed life. I think that's the same thing here, you know, because they've been, I think it's particularly Ira Magaziner. I don't think Bill is too close to detail. The young minions who are around the Clintons, you know, were told just go off and, you know, say anything. You know, I don't know if you remember the perfume ad from long ago. I don't know if it was around when you were younger. There was a perfume called Arpege, A-R-P-E-G-E, and the tagline was, "Promise her anything, but give her Arpege." And similarly, you know,
that's a terrible ad.
It was all over the place for a while.
Wow.
But that's what these people have been doing. They've been going around, you know, the world to all sorts of countries. Can you do climate change? Sure, no problem. Can you do HIV/AIDS? You want HIV/AIDS? We'll do HIV/AIDS. That's what they've been doing. All over the world. I
feel like someday we'll look back on all of this. It's like when you go see a movie from the 1950s and they play the ads and it's like, more doctors recommend Pall Mall.
Exactly.
So the doctor smoking, it's like, what the hell was everybody thinking?
That's right.
So we'll get to that, I think.
Yeah, but before we do, I mean, once again, this art department is on overdrive.
You know,
and hats off.
Always trying, Charles.
It's extremely well done. And we are honored today. We will be linking, first we're going to cover, you know, normal business, but then we have the great pleasure of linking in a longtime friend of mine and a new friend of yours and an ally and supporter of Crowdsource, financially and otherwise, Fabien Chalandon. You'll get a big dose of Fabien on this show.
Yeah.
And he is, I can tell you that when Fabien Chalandon sinks his teeth into something, you don't want to be on the other side of that curve. You just don't want to be on the other side of that curve. Because not only is he very smart and well-connected and thorough, but he's built up over decades a network of friends around the world who are serious people.
Serious people. And this will also be an interesting little update to the format because Fabien resides in Japan, and because of you know, time zone differences, we pre-recorded that segment. So perhaps you and I will get a chance to be in the comments and interact a bit with the Crowdsource community while we're running that.
That's a great idea.
Now, Charles, there's been so much crazy news this week. Perhaps we want to talk about the release of the FISA memo, the Devin Nunes memo, before we get into this week's slides.
It's in the slides, so.
Oh, well, of course, but.
So why don't we just go to the first page of the slide and we'll tee it up and get right into it. That's the other one.
Yeah.
There's some bleeding issues.
Yeah, it's, you know.
All right, so what we're going to talk about, we call this History of the Crooked or Corrupt Globalist World. The art department improved it from crooked to corrupt. But, and we call it part 2, or second part, or whatever.
Why is that?
Well, the reason is we're going to do a show, and we may have to do more than one. We may have to do 1A, 1B, 1C.
This is like your Star Wars numbering system.
Right.
Part 2
yeah, just keep them confused,
first.
right? But no, the issue here is that we're picking the story up in the really 2001 time frame, whereas globalism, the advent of globalism, I would argue, really took to the fore when the Berlin Wall fell in 1988. That's when, you know, I, for one, I never expected the Berlin Wall to fall and Eastern Europe to go away, nor did I ever think that I would be allowed to spend time in the former Soviet Union or Russia or communicate, be interviewed, as I have been now in many different ways, but with smart people from Russia who are apolitical. I mean, it's not a espionage game. We're just addressing fraud here. And so that's when it really started, and we're going to have to do a show about, you know, explaining 1988 up to 2001.
Swalwell's going to accuse you of working for Putin.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Did you see that dope on Tucker Carlson?
I know, it's just that guy's he's an idiot. Yeah.
It's, I mean, all you know, ad hominem attacks aside, it is astounding to me how they're just hanging on tooth and nail to that memo. how people really still think like there's some doubt. We'll go over this in depth when you get to it, but
Sure.
I'm shocked by the reaction of people on the left to the revelations in the memo, that people don't see that this is a manufactured bit of evidence that led to the illegal obtaining of a FISA surveillance approval that basically allowed the FBI to spy on citizens, to spy on a guy who was running for the president, that fake information was paid for by his opposition. I mean, we cannot stress enough how huge of a scandal this is.
Right, well, when you go back in, it's good you bring it up this way, when you go back into the precursor to the Part 1 period, what was going on under H.W. Bush and under Bill Clinton, I would argue, was that certain American interests were in league with perhaps crooked Russians to loot the former Soviet Union. I mean, that's what Mark Rich was basically doing. That's what he was all about. And so there is a Russian theme here. It's far more complicated than, Russia good, America, Russia bad, America good. It's, there are bad people in both countries and good people in both countries.
Sure.
And, the Uniparty in Washington, D.C. has been desperately trying to, obfuscate and conceal these connections into the bad Russians that predate the 2015-16 campaign cycle. So you're absolutely right. The Clintons are masters and mistresses, and we talked about this before, of gaslighting, accusing their opponents of the very things that they're doing. And of course they're yelling and screaming. Of course they don't want the Nunes memo out.
Makes them look terrible.
It makes them look terrible.
Now I have an important question for you.
Sure.
There is a film called Anatomy of a Great Deception. That's a documentary made by like an ex-school teacher or something, like very much YouTube documentary, but it is so filled with great information about 9/11 scientific findings from the debris and all that. And I believe it's in that film that they talk about natural resources futures, I think, was the financial instrument that they were talking about that was supposed to mature on September 12th, 2001, that were held by like the Carlyle Group and all of these different investment entities that are, got Bush fingerprints and handprints all over them. Of course, Marvin Bush was the CEO of Securicom just prior to that. And what this documentary said was that one of the objectives of 9/11, because if we're going to go down the road of, I don't believe that it was 19 guys acting by themselves that crashed those planes, but these types of things, whether it's Vegas, whether it's JFK assassination, 9/11, there's multiple objectives so that the redundancy ensures a positive outcome. If these 5 things don't work out, these other 20 will. What the documentary basically said was that George Bush and his cronies basically bought up all the natural resources of the recently failed Soviet Union in 1991, or the about to fail. When did the perestroika happen?
92.
Yeah, so 1991 they bought all this stuff or whatever, and or no, 1992. I got the details wrong. People have to watch that documentary. But that the destruction of the World Trade Center allowed the SEC to implement some emergency rule that allowed them to like push this crooked stuff through and steal all kinds of money in the form of these futures.
Well, I don't know anything at all about
that for a future episode.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's okay. So if we could just go back to the slides.
Yeah.
So, and we can go to the next one and just quickly remind our viewers who have been so good to us and have been watching this and are accustomed to seeing this slide. We'll always like to open with this slide because here in America, thanks to sacrifices of the many fallen and still vigilant members of our military forces around the world, we have an absolute right to say what we want to say, assuming it's based on grounded analysis and assessment of available facts. And so everything that we talk about in these shows is based upon analysis. We provide supporting links so you can see how we came up with all this. Indeed, today we're going to go through a brief summary of how well the shows are doing. And I think we should start, Jason, maybe kneel down and thank our viewers for being so indulgent to stay with us through these very lengthy presentations. It's important that we put them out this way. This is why Germany and other nations are coming to us, because they have the benefit of these shows. Thank you, Jason, for letting us do all this on your your great network here, Crowdsource the Truth. But if we go back into the...
Well, I just wanted to tell people about the playlist, because that's one of the best ways for people to get into, if you're just coming to Charles, Sunday with Charles. This is a great way to have all of this information organized in chronological order. People can do a Charles or telethon and just watch hours and hours. How many hours did you determine we have done of broadcasting?
Excluding today's performance, I believe we're over 56 hours, which is a lot of hours, having started only August 20th, 2017. Now that excludes some of the other ones that we did that were not Sunday with Charles.
Right.
But
you know, and actually, in the interest of efficiency, I thought of a method that we could employ that might reduce our average show duration from 2 hours and 30 minutes to maybe 90 seconds. Instead of focusing on the defects of the Clinton Foundation, you could just talk about what aspects of it they did that weren't illegal. We'd be out of here in 5 minutes.
That's right. Couldn't do that.
No, you couldn't do that.
Couldn't find anything.
Right.
So, all right, so turning then to the question of what indeed recently has happened. All right, so I think if we could pull up the first link, the Zero Hedge link.
Yes.
And I do heavily rely on Zero Hedge, and here's a shout out to them. I believe it's an alias name, Tyler Durden, but Tyler, you're doing great work. And in the old days, back in 2007-8, I would have turned into Bloomberg first, because back then I thought they were doing very good work. But the approach that Zero Hedge takes is so much better than Bloomberg.
Why is that?
First of all, it's faster. It's 24/7. And they quickly summarize the topic, but then provide, if you're somebody like me who likes the additional detail, give you additional links. And then there's a comment section that often is hysterical. So the comments, and then you get a lot of leads very quickly. So if you care about the markets, if you care about geopolitics and politics, if you care about breaking stories, this is the place to go first. I hesitate to speak the way former President Barack Obama speaks, but it's the first thing I check in the morning and the last thing I check before I go to sleep is Zero Hedge. And here we have a story, and there's now been a second story. That's 82,000. That's pretty good. We have a story where the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, and that's a very powerful position. That's the person who actually runs the Department of Justice day to day, whereas the Attorney General is more like he's not a figurehead, but it's more a CEO position. The person who's really got his or her hand on the machinery is Rosenstein.
So that's like how the FBI works as well. We've heard
Exactly.
that McCabe, even though he's the deputy director, he was kind of the action man, and dopey James Comey is just in charge of putting out stupid tweets.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the way a lot of the government works. The secretary is sort of has overall responsibility, but the person who's really making the operations run is the deputy. And so here you have the deputy threatening a member of Congress,
Absurd.
saying that potentially he's tired of all this oversight. And these are co-equal branches. A lot of power is invested in Mr. Rosenstein from the standpoint that he does have his hands on the machinery, a prosecutorial machinery, and the FBI reports to him.
Yeah.
So he should not get off threatening the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, which is regulating him.
Certainly
And
not.
in particular, we're going to be doing some work on this in the coming week. When you go into Mr. Rosenstein's background, it's not just one screw-up in my mind. There's a long period of screw-ups going back to concluding, apparently, as Associate Special Counsel, that there was nothing to see here, move along, these aren't your droids or whatever, on the FBI files. He was the guy who did that. He was the guy who couldn't find anything to prosecute tax-wise on the Clinton Foundation frauds between 2001 and 2005, which is ridiculous. He's the guy, when he went to Maryland, who just thought it was okay. I don't know why. Maybe he was overruled at higher levels by people, but cooperated in letting this trucking thing go on and on and on, and uranium go on and on and on, and Laureate go on and on and on, and Clinton, Bush, Haiti go on and on and on, and the various frauds involving the Clinton Foundation that were actually happening, go on and on and on, and the reorganization, on and on and on. There's just so many questions here, and chief among them for me is why Donald Trump's team, maybe they were overwhelmed, but why they would have even selected this guy. I mean, I think
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, yeah.
I think possibly the swamp here was being very clever.
Yeah.
They were saying, you know, here's somebody who served under H.W. He actually served under Clinton, then H.W. Bush, and then under Obama. So he's clearly, in
that
theory,
makes him seem
bipartisan, all
yeah,
that.
But he's just deeply embedded in the swamp. Those guys are all swamp captains.
Right, which leaves out the issue of his wife, who is, I'm sure, a wonderful person, but also worked in the Clinton Justice Department. And what can happen down any of these big cities, you know, politics down in D.C., if it's a husband and wife team, you know, and you've got kids, and you've got private school, or your school issues, or whatever, there are always ways to kind of get you, trap you, you know, if you want to get into this private school, or you want to be in this country club, or you want something, or whatever, there are ways to get you.
Well, I think they just mention your kids, and they say, oh, nice family you have there, and suddenly it's a thing. Right. Not to keep derailing you, Charles, but I want to ask you about this. James Comey, first of all, he's a lawyer, right?
In theory.
So why would he be tweeting? Don't you think after he got fired from his position in the FBI, wouldn't any lawyer basically tell him to STFU and not go tweeting? I am convinced that James Comey is using Twitter to communicate in code because, you know, unlike a college age, you know, millennial who feels the need to be tweeting, or myself or whoever, why is he tweeting so much? It just seems like it can't possibly benefit him. And I wonder if he's not sending out messages, him and Eric Holder, sending out dopey messages to their whoever.
Yeah, I mean, I think what could actually be happening here, we go back to the FBI files question, and we have the benefit of the FBI vault. And we know that when people are doing investigations, or actually investigating, unlike what happened with the Clinton email saga, which was not a real
investigation.
Yeah, when you're actually investigating, what will happen, I'm sure, is that you will go down blind alleys, or alleys that may seem blind to you at the time you're going through them, because you don't have the full picture.
Right.
And so, as a guess, I hope the FBI maintains excellent records. Now, if
so they can burn them.
Well, but if you are, and those records are supposed to be kept confidential, because in this country still we are innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. And so, you know, people who are trafficking in FBI files, and you know, may learn things about potential enemies or rivals that they feel gives them leverage. And if it is the case that James Comey did that, you know, or God forbid Robert Mueller did that.
You mean?
No, you have access. You can imagine, you know, even within, and perhaps especially within law enforcement, there are crooked people, you know, and they will look at this and say, on the one hand, I'm paid, you know, $150,000 to do or whatever the number is.
But I really like Porsches.
Yeah, I like those Porsches, you know, and I've got a secret here that could be worth a lot of money.
Right.
You know, you could imagine it being corrupt, and that is what I sense through all this. I think that unregulated globalism, the complexity of it, has created opportunities for crooked people around the world who are not playing with 100,000 and not playing with millions. They're not even playing with single billions. They're playing in some cases with hundreds of billions of dollars. And to look at, you know, somebody who might be, you know, corruptible at, let's say, 5 million, you know, to get yourself another 2 billion,
right,
is not a tough call if you're crooked anyway.
Right.
So, you know, that's why this is such a damaging thing. And the specter of Shifty Adam Schiff and Schmucky Chuck Schumer.
Schmuck Schumer.
Yeah, you know, getting out there and, you know, Pelosi, who's, I don't know what she's thinking, or if she's actually thinking when she opens her pie hole. I mean, you know, these people are behaving. They don't even have good coaches. They are acting guilty.
Nervous.
They're around something that reeks to high heaven, you know. And if we go back into the slides, here we have, on the one hand, Rosenstein apparently threatening people. And then, in the second Zero Hedge thing, the Nunes Memo, I actually got it, the second link here. You know, here's an example. This is 5.6 thousand shares. It came out on Friday. I think this is an update. And they give you a quick summary. And you go through this, and the notion that our government multiple times starting October 21st, 2016, right before the election, would have gone before this court, this secret court, where you don't have a chance. The
Can't
government,
defend yourself.
Right. The government goes to the secretive court. I'm not even sure if we know who all the judges are on the court and how they were selected and whether they're reliable. You go before the secret court, and on the strength of this Steele dossier, which is, it's not even a bad spy novel. I mean, it's just a joke.
Totally made up.
On the strength of that, and then corroborated in quotes by this, I'll frankly say, this idiot, Cody Shearer.
Who got the information leaked from Christopher Steele.
Exactly, and who also has a long track record of being highly suspicious in the Clinton camp, possibly having intimidated people like Kathleen Willey in the past. This is a very suspicious group of people on October 21st, going before a FISA court at a time when they still had not dry cleaned the Abedin, Anthony Weiner, dirty as hell laptop computer, which had been in the FBI's possession around late September 2016. They didn't look at that because that was something they had in their possession.
Yeah.
Instead, they go to the FISA court and they say, you know what? Here we got the spy novel over here. National Enquirer wouldn't print the story, but we're going to take it to you.
Huh.
And corroborated by Cody Shearer and this guy Andrew Downer, who is clearly, the former foreign minister of Australia,
oh, yeah.
clearly in the tank for the Clintons. He is dumber than a potted plant to have, have signed this memorandum of understanding February 22nd, 2006 in Australia to give Australian taxpayer money to an entity that didn't exist, and then to continue doing this for many, many years. Obviously, there are serious questions about him.
Yeah.
You're going to take his word, and this British spy, who was the head of the Russian efforts to spy into, the UK efforts to spy into Russia, you're going to take, and some young guy, this Papadopoulos character, you're going to take their word and launch this initiative on October 21st, but you're not going to look into the Aberdeen, laptop until the 30th of October?
It's crazy.
It's outrageous. I mean, there's an obvious lack of balance there.
But also the FBI, I think, dismissed Christopher Steele as an informant because they determined he was unreliable.
Yeah, it's just it's as again President Obama would say, these are not our values. I mean, they're really not our values. You cannot do this.
Yeah.
I don't care whether you love Trump, hate Trump, love Clinton. The issue is a question of balance. You can't have your finger not only on the scale, but you preordained the outcome. You're drafting exoneration letters for Hillary. But you're going to take the word of three dimwits, to go after Trump on October 21st because the poll numbers probably weren't looking too good.
Right.
Anyway, so we go back into it. Now, this is also yet another Zero Hedge story, but there is a great divide here between the way in which MSNBC and NBC and CNN and others are treating this recent episode, and the way in which Sean Hannity, who I think is doing a fantastic job, and others at Fox, and frankly others like Utrice Lead on Progressive Radio. I'm very happy to be on her show regularly. There's somebody who is clearly not in the same camp as I am politically, but is fair-minded, outraged by charity fraud, and outraged by the double standard.
Well, I think it's good that you mentioned Utrice, because I think for a lot of people, and I like Sean Hannity, but for a lot of people, as soon as you mention him, they automatically, everything has been very compartmentalized, where either you're watching CNN or Fox, and if you or I say something that's perceived by someone on the left as coming from Fox, they just think it's biased and whatever. I can't really stress enough how this whole thing goes beyond Republicans and Democrats, beyond Fox and CNN and all that. This is an abuse. This is making up a lie to go surveil a U.S. citizen, and not just a U.S. citizen, a U.S. citizen who was running for president, and the guy who made up the lie was paid by his opponent.
And we don't really yet know how much the pay was. Perhaps Nunes does know, and others, but we don't know. I heard a figure that Paul Singer had spent about $400,000 through May, but now the total number is something like 12 million.
Who got that 12 million?
Well, I mean, 12 million is an absurd amount of money to pay for a report. I mean, at 12 million, you'd pay, if you were careful with your money, you might pay 12 million for, whatever it is, a 60-page report. because it's going to tell you how you can live to be 1,000 years old and be a teenager for the rest of that time. But I mean, you're not going to spend...
And have 11,980,000 paperclip to it.
Right, exactly. You know, I mean, it's just nuts.
That is nuts.
It's nuts. And so I want to know how many people in the mainstream media, and maybe their boyfriends and girlfriends or whatever, were paid off. Yeah, Rachel, oh my God.
Well, I mean, look, they are paid off. When Rachel Maddow gets, what does she earn, $5 million a year? Obviously, she's going to say whatever they want. I mean...
Well, and shame on her. I mean, she is
terrible.
Well, but I mean, she you know, we joke about the rogue scholar, but she was a rogue scholar, and you know, generally speaking, ordinarily you can't be like a C student and be a rogue scholar. You've got to have some academic pattern of distinction over a long period of time. Here she is, a rogue scholar, and just blabbering at this point. I mean, there's a real story here. We should all be concerned. Whether you're a Trump supporter today or you hope to be, I don't know, a Cory Booker supporter tomorrow, you should care when you see this epic level of abuse by not over just the election cycle, going perhaps way back, involving Republicans and Democrats, the swamp.
It's crazy.
It's nuts.
Because I mean, what people really need to think about is, what if someone just said, "Hey, I think Charles is spying for Russia," and then they were like, "Okay, let's investigate Charles," and there's no evidence or whatever, and they just start digging into everything, putting you in question, causing you millions of dollars worth of legal fees to defend that. It just can't, that's not, I think a lot of people say, "Oh, I don't like Donald Trump, so that's okay, violate his constitutional rights and investigate him," and all that.
Well, you raise an excellent point, as usual. I mean, if you go back and you think about, one of the things that alarmed me about Snowden was that here we have a private contractor has access to all this information.
Booz Allen.
Well, but how many other private contractors have access to this information, and how many people could be corrupted as a private contractor to use that,
right.
or to use it, And really, what we're going to see here, I suspect, it's not simply getting the FISA warrant that was the problem. What was the problem was this cabal decided to use the databases to sniff out and lay traps for those who might come in under the Trump administration. And that's what we need to see. We need to see interfaces, not just the secret text messages between the lovers, but we need to see how many attempts were made. We hear that Samantha Power's defense is that the unmasking requests were made in her name, but not by her. Well, how does that happen? I mean, you shouldn't be able, as Jason Goodman, to use Samantha Power's name because you happen to work
in some cash or paychecks.
Yeah, exactly. You rely on the Awan brothers for that. And then you have, on top of that, you have these stories about, this person's laptop is missing in Russia and that person's missing somewhere else. I mean, it's like the Keystone Cops here. Yeah. And the information they have, we see how powerful it is, how valuable it is, and we see how stupid the system of, managing the State Department on private servers. I mean, it's the contrast. It's just epic.
And again, I think you're being generous when you let them off the hook by saying it's stupid. I feel it was deliberate. People in our comments, Charles, they want to know if you think we're going to see arrests over the actions described in this FISA memo.
Well, I hope so. I think, again, I'm not an expert on law enforcement, but just thinking it through tactically, if I were trying to go after the biggest criminal conspiracy ever attempted in the world, perhaps.
You've hit pay dirt.
What I would, exactly, that's right. You've got jail. So what I'd want to do is, at this point, I'd be raising the pressure. And what I would be doing is I would be going out to all the people who thought they got away, the people, there's a guy named Joe
Obama?
Well, no. First, I go after all the people, the corroborating witnesses. So the Tammy Sons, the Anita Botts, the Joe Cashins, the Skip Rutherford, who was the CEO of the Clinton Foundation for a while, Andrew Kessel, the CFO, all of those people, BKD, the law firms, Kamiki Gibson,
Perkins Coie,
all of these people. And the FBI does have 35,000 people in it, so they can do more than one thing at a time. And I would be getting all, Uma Abedin and even Chelsea Clinton. I would start with them, and I would be paying a lot of attention to David Kendall and Williams and Connolly and their partners, and letting them know this isn't a game anymore. You are a law firm. That does not mean you engage in criminal activity. Law firms have been shut down for being criminal enterprises in the past. You know, it is possible to discipline a crooked law firm, and a lot of these firms have gotten rich off the fraud. So I'd be stepping the pressure up on the one hand and letting people know that Corinne Brown is in prison for 5 years, but this is a zone where if you don't cooperate, and if worse, if you resist, you know, kiss your freedom goodbye. And it's not going to be in the Martha Stewart prison that you're going to go. You know, you're going to be going to a different place, and you're not going to like your cellmates. and so that's the direction I go. If we go back into the slides, now one thing I want to mention here and give a shout out to is this thing, the conservative Treehouse. They're doing wonderful work. This fourth one, next one down, really good work. And often, if we could make it just a little smaller, there's whoever Sundance is. You know, I don't know who the Sundance person is. A shout out to you. Your work is superb. And we won't go into the detail, but this person and also Dick Morris has made a point that Carter Page was targeted in a search warrant not because his name came up in incidental gathering of intelligence, but rather because he was thought to be a spy. Now, I don't think you should be able to accuse somebody of being a spy for another government unless you have pretty good evidence of that before a FISA court. I mean, that's because, you know, after all, there are a lot of people who do, when I was doing a lot of traveling, you know, I would regularly spend, you know, I don't know, 40 weeks of the 52-week period outside the country. When you do that, you're going to encounter lots and lots of foreign people. You're not going to be able to check every person you meet to know, you know, whether this big business person or this big media person also has some link somehow to you know. And so just because here's a guy who's in the Merrill Lynch office in Moscow, charged with raising you know, doing deals in a country where most of the oligarchs have ties to the government one way or the other, you know, you can't, you got to work pretty hard to accuse that banker of being a spy, you know, and I'd love to see the real evidence that said that Carter Page was a spy. And if, you know, as my hackles are up here, if Carter Page has been inappropriately targeted, I think he has a major league lawsuit because he is...
Against who?
Well, I don't know who you'd sue, but he deserves recompense here.
He's in the oil and gas business, right?
I don't know what he is now. I mean, he was a Merrill Lynch banker when Merrill Lynch existed. And I don't know what he is now.
That was my understanding, was that he's in oil and gas, and that's why he had done a lot of business in Russia, and that's why they wanted him on the Trump advisory team, because he had international experience and had negotiated, you know, I mean, that's the thing. They just sort of like say, oh, this guy's been to Russia, let's target him.
Right, but again, you know, to make a big deal out of somebody who's on a quote advisory team. I mean, advisory boards and teams generally have no, you know, legal liability, no downside. They're just consultative bodies. You know, Donald Trump, I think, keeps his own mind, makes up his own mind.
And Trump barely knew Carter Page.
Well, exactly. So I think, you know, this is something that really needs to be gone over with a fine-tooth comb. I don't trust anybody who opposed release of this memo, especially including Shifty Adam Schiff, you know, getting up there before the microphone and that idiot Gerald Nadler, you know, making up all this hyperbole. We can't see this, and you look at it, you know, it's an obvious set of problems. But there are no sources and methods. There's no compromise.
Well, no, there is. The whole revelation of how Christopher Steele was utilized reveals their sources and methods, and reveals to the people of the United States that they're using incompetent, fake, fictional nonsense, and that just blows Adam Schiff's whole deal. So he doesn't want people to know about that.
But keep up the great work, Sundance. And then I have a piece. This is this me? Or it could be Mark, actually. Let's just see this one.
LifeSet?
That one, yeah. LifeSet.
The new publication from Mr. Tapscott.
Oh, yeah, exactly. This is a shameless promotion. Forgive me for doing this, but this is a piece where what we've been doing is, I did in this one, I summarized some of the work that we did last Wednesday, providing links to people to see that, in fact, Hillary Clinton and Huma Abedin and others were under a formal, full-scale FBI investigation into mishandling of classified information that began on July 10th, 2000, 2015. This is before the crazy agreement was struck between the Hillary Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee to have her take over, basically, the Democratic National Campaign Committee before the primaries even started. She was under a formal FBI full-scale investigation, as well she should have been, in theory.
Not a normal security review?
Not a normal security review. And the evidence for this is on the FBI vault file. And people just don't want to listen to it. Shifty Adam Schiff, doesn't want to believe that there was a problem there. He has been duped. The Bernie supporters were, I think, maybe willingly duped in some cases. But,
no, I think Bernie supporters were tricked. I mean, people thought Bernie was the real deal.
Well, I'm saying willingly duped by Bernie.
Right.
Right, because Bernie and his wife may have had their own problems with that college.
Right.
So anyway, this is, it's a shameless promotion, but if you have the time, please read this piece, more for the links that let you see the hard evidence that I was talking about in the discussion that we had last Wednesday. Mm-hmm. So if we go back into the slides, we then have this, Nunes is saying, that piece there, which you've highlighted, that this is just phase one. I would beg, not knowing the details, I would beg to differ. I think that phase one, or the entire banquet known to date, is the Horowitz IG report that was issued January 12th, 2018. Now that is, no outsider has seen that, but as a guess, they were at that for a long time. There's a lot of stuff to go through and plow through, and that's the real deal. Mm-hmm. That's the mega deal. And the summary in phase one, it just opens up the conversation that we're having in the body politic about what exactly was happening and why it was so wrong. And I think it has whet the public appetite to learn more.
And there's actually been a number of conversations with Dr. Stephen, who is an OIG expert. He is a compliance expert and has a lot of inside knowledge on the inspector generals and what they do. So we've had a couple of different conversations with Dr. Stephen about specifically about Inspector General Horowitz and his feeling that Horowitz is going to play a pivotal role in draining the swamp. So we'll see what happens in the next couple days. That should be quite interesting.
That's great.
Yeah.
So, and well done.
Thank you.
So then, this is the second Life Set piece is by Mark Tapscott, my friend over there, mm-hmm. and he's a distinguished investigative journalist. That's the first one, then the second one. And many people who are new to following politics may not understand just how long the Clintons have been involved abusing law enforcement to go after their enemies. And in the case of once they get to Washington, D.C., they were using the FBI, but before then in Arkansas, they were using state troopers.
Right. State troopers, and also I think, even before you and I met and started doing these shows, Charles, it occurred to me that the Clintons seemed to have a pattern and practice of gaining control over the coroner, over the attorney general, whether at a state level or a national level, and the investigator. And I think if you control just those three, you can literally get away with murder, as they allegedly may have in the past.
And here Mark points it was 400 FBI confidential files, and the Associate Special Counsel determined that there was no there in these 400 confidential FBI confidential files, leaving the FBI and ending up in the White House. The person who decided not to prosecute or make an issue of it was Rod Rosenstein. I mean, that, just for that. I mean, we used to have, when I was doing banking business at the firm where the first firm where I worked, Dillon Reed, you have to think through your conflicts of interest in business very carefully when you're advising clients, your professional responsibilities. Just that one thing alone would be enough for me to say Rod Rosenstein should have nothing to do with any investigation of a Trump v. Clinton contest. You just shouldn't have happened. I don't even think he should have been selected for Deputy Attorney of the Attorney General of the United States, and I'd love to understand the thinking process behind selecting that person.
I believe that Donald Trump is learning a lot. I mean, the office of President of the United States, it's got to be a complicated job, and you kind of, on the job training. I think he's learning a lot. And I think, I know I am, I think most of the American public is learning an unprecedented learning right now of how all this works and how much of what everyone thinks is essentially manufactured by the mainstream media, how pivotal it has been. And that's a story also, well, did we already cover that? That the mainstream media that's coming up is complicit in all this.
Right. And then the final one here is this one. Again, Zero Hedge was doing a lot of work on Superb Owl Sunday weekend. But you see here, 14,000 shares for something that came out Friday at almost midnight is a lot. Yeah. And here we have GOP reps seeking criminal prosecution and maybe even treason.
Right, yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. Paul Gosar, treason, that's a big deal.
Well, that could be what we're talking about here. I mean, we have
death penalty for people like Andrew McCabe, James Comey.
Well, I mean, you can't invest in the FBI and these security services the kind of power that they have, the ability to, to deny congressional oversight, any look at to threaten the congressional oversight. Meanwhile, while they're running riot around the world, you can't have a situation like that.
Definitely not.
And then learn that they were acting potentially against the interests of the United States, either trying to, overthrow an election and or to serve the interests of foreign powers. You can't do that. And if that did happen, then there needs to be very serious reckoning. And if it if people are found to have committed treason, let the judges decide what the penalty should be. But I believe it's capital.
And if you can't do the time, don't do the crime. The other serious thing is that if everybody who was involved just gets a slap on the wrist and walks away,
right,
it's just a lot of money wasted in the courts, and the message sent is that you might as well just keep on keeping on with what you were doing.
Yeah, so I think we can go to the next slide. And this is just, we'll go through this relatively quickly because a lot of this we've covered in the past. But, there are a lot of talk. What animated the Mueller investigation was a theory that foreign governments, specifically Russia, were meddling in our election either by contributing items of value to the Trump campaign. So, there are laws against foreign governments meddling in American campaigns. And there are reasons why foreign governments would have an interest in meddling in the American election. After all, we're the biggest economy on earth, the biggest market on earth, we have the most powerful military on earth. There are all sorts of reasons why a foreign government leader might be interested in meddling in our election. But, and this is a good piece here that goes through some of those issues, but we should consider all this, remembering that under not just simply the Barack Obama administration, but previous administrations, the American government has meddled in foreign elections, for decades. We've done it, right? You think about Radio Free Europe is one way during the Cold War.
What about like killing Salvador Allende and stuff like that?
Right. So I think this, it is time to have a grown-up discussion about the role of our security services, how they should get regulated, what special responsibilities should be placed upon these services. Do we really need 17 or 18 of them? Should we allow, I frankly think maybe he in another lifetime was smart, but this guy, Admiral Clapper or whatever his name is, standing up there and testifying, the Muslim Brotherhood is a secular organization, which is why they call it the Muslim Brotherhood. I mean, it's just, and he also has, he's supposed to be, I think he was the top spy, and he's a guy, he's got no, if he plays poker, he's got no money left because he does not have a poker face. Ask him a question, he starts doing,
I remember the last time he testified, Lionel described it as he looked like he was waiting for a bus.
Waiting for a what?
A bus. He was just like annoyed, and it was ridiculous.
So in the second link here on page 27, if we just go to that one, this is the form for 2007. You go to page 27 here.
Of this?
Yeah. what we'll see are the instructions, what you're supposed to do in this IRS form. And indeed, these page 27. I think you're way past. Oh, no.
627.
Yeah, government contributions grants.
Okay.
Okay, line 1D. A grant or other payment from a governmental unit is treated as a contribution if the primary purpose is to enable the donee to provide a service to or maintain a facility for the direct benefit of the public rather than to serve the direct and immediate needs of the grantor, even if the public pays part of the expense of providing the service or facility. Anyway, there's a bunch of examples, but you've got to fill in that line of all government grants. And the Clinton Foundation has never to this day done that for the tax forms 1998 to 2007. And what the IRS does with people, everybody other than the Clintons, if you don't fill in your tax forms completely, they're not deemed to be filed, right? So they have their filings for 1998 to 2007 were never filled out properly. A key issue in this early period, especially really through 2005 when Dopey James Comey and Rosenstein and Wray and Mueller and others, in theory, were looking at this, was to what extent was the Clinton Foundation in that period used as a dirty laundry to purchase influence with a rising star, Hillary Clinton, who may someday become President of the United States.
Most qualified candidate ever.
Exactly. So how do you let the Clinton Foundation off the responsibility for filling these forms out, even to this day? They've amended their forms for prior years. They've never fixed this problem. And then you go into, this is the MOU, the next one. We've seen this before, but we should look at it.
This?
No, the MOU. Yeah. This one, if we've been through it before, but the 2007 tax forms were filed right about the same time the Memorandum of Understanding came together. And here in this Memorandum of Understanding, where the Clinton Foundation is talking to the incoming Obama administration, if we go a little further down, they're bragging about all the money they got from foreign governments.
It's just brazen.
You know, and this is, go to the next page, I think. Yeah. When we forget the presidential library.
Oh, the strip club, that's his favorite thing.
Yeah. But here's the HIV/AIDS initiative. Go a little bit further. It says, okay, CHI's work is made possible in part by the dedicated governments around the world who are contributing to the global fight against AIDS and supporting CHI's efforts, including Australia, Ireland, Great Britain, Sweden, Canada, France, Denmark, Norway, the Dominican Republic, as well as the countries who support UNITAID. We're going to talk about UNITAID in depth later on, including France, Brazil, Norway, Chile, and Great Britain. Okay, this is, you know, where are the records of the contributions from these governments from 1998 to 2007 and afterwards? How come they're not shown in the tax forms? Now you can go to that state form, which is the prior link. Now, if you go here to page 3, there, you see, you're supposed to list out every single government.
Oh, and this is how they filed it?
Well, no, this is a blank form,
okay.
but you're supposed to have, and this form began to be put together this way in 2004, when they were raising money from foreign governments. Remember, they went to Ireland, they went to Norway, etc. You're supposed to fill this out, and I have spoken to the New York State people multiple times, and they explain here that you're not allowed to just put down France. You've got to put, you know, the department of the French government, the purpose of the grant, the amount of the grant, the address of the, same thing in California, same issue, and they haven't done any of that correctly. And you're not allowed, and those forms are therefore not filed, and you're delinquent on your tax filings in New York and California and elsewhere. So if we go back to the slides, you know, we don't have to, we're mindful of the time. We've shown you the list before that the Clinton Foundation provided right around the time of the MOU, and in that list, they list out foreign governments, but they don't change their filings, their tax filings. Let's just see. Oh yeah, and then another one, we can hit this one for fun. This is another way to torture these people, which is appropriate. When you are taking money from the federal government above a certain amount, you have to get a single audit. It's a term of art. There are no single audits that I've been able to find in this clearinghouse prior to 2010. But there should have been. So where are these single audits? You know, this is the kind of stuff the IRS and the FBI should be able to get. And single audits are tougher than, actually in some ways tougher than regular audits, in that you have to list out again all the identities of all the grants, and there are other tougher questions that are asked in these single audits. And so where are them? Where are they?
What happened?
Exactly, what happened? So we go back into it, to the slides. Yeah, and then we hit this one. We've shown this to you before. You know, this is one that I hope Robin Gritz and others in the FBI go back over this ground. There are a lot of missing documents in these filing, in this FBI vault, that the FBI should have access to. Go back through the record. The record shows me people scurrying like crazy when Mary Jo White was the U.S. attorney before dopey James Comey took over. She's doing her work. Subpoenas are flying. We learned from, you know, Racket Man of the World, Joe Conison's book, Man of the World. On page 42, we learn in that book that the activities of Mary Jo White were having a chilling impact on fundraising. We learned that. And then everything changes when dopey James Comey takes over and Mueller's installed as head of the FBI, and they spin their wheels and the fraud escalates. We need to go back into that and understand, you know, why did Christopher Wray by 2003 say, there's no criminal thing here? Why did Rod Rosenstein at some point between 2001 and 2005 say, no, when there were obvious frauds?
You know, Charles, I don't know if we've ever really discussed this, and I wasn't allowed to live stream it, but I actually went to, I'm sure viewers who've been with us for a while will recall, I went to the confirmation hearing of Christopher Wray.
Oh, did you?
And it was like theater. It was ridiculous. Lindsey Graham said a bunch of stupid stuff, and it just seemed totally fake. It seemed staged.
Yeah.
And well, Christopher Wray, people have questions about him. True Pundit was reporting that White House insiders told them that Christopher Wray did a 180 in the 24 hours before the release of the FISA memo and threatened to quit, I think, which Trump probably didn't care.
Well, Sidney Powell, we'll get her on the show, she's actually doing an interview right now for Donna Fiducia, who I spoke to before we went on air, and Sidney Powell does not have good things to say about Rosenstein, does not have good things to say about Mueller. You know, and her book, License to Lie, is a book we featured in the past. It really deserves a close read. We'll go back into the slides. So what happened after 2004 when dopey James Comey and Mr. Mueller and others decided not to go after the Clintons, gave them a pass, is that the frauds only escalated. In a bit, we're not going to go to the next page now, but in a bit, we will take you through an example of how this massage parlor and, you know, above ground garden, mini golf course, double wide over the Arkansas River, you know, basically was a sideshow as Ira Magaziner and Bill Clinton went around the world, traveling around the world, and going over to France and others, and scoring mega cash that seems to have just disappeared. And we're talking here about hundreds of millions of dollars. So if we go to the addendum slides.
Yes.
All right, and we go to the first page.
I'll tell you, I think you and I should go to the restaurant called 42.
I'm not going to Arkansas. No way. So what we've done here is laid out some metrics for you, our viewers, so you get to see what you could find about the podcasts that we've done. And there's a little bit of bleeding in this, but so forgive me for that.
Oops.
But yeah, that's the one we want. That's first page. What we've done here is I've laid out every single one. We've done 27 Sunday with Charles shows, okay? And from between August 20th, 2017 and the 15th of November, we did 24 hours of programming that got 185,000 views. Now, the people I've spoken to in the industry, both the mainstream and now the alternative industry, media industry, say that this type of performance is actually somewhat special. I think we built on the success of Crowdsource you started Crowdsource before we started this. So you had some loyalty in your viewership that bled into here. But to get this, and thank you for that, but to get this many views for podcasts like ours, which are, you know, averaging over 2 hours, is pretty special. And if you go to the second page, and I guess it bleeds into the third page, the overall total, 56 hours, 498,000 views.
It's amazing.
I mean, that's a lot.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Charles, I have to say, I think that you've got an amazing ability to dig into this material. And this ties in, I think, to the story with the FISA memo, because the FISA memo, we're really entering a new era here. And it's not necessarily because of Donald Trump, the man, but just technology, society, the way everything is working right now. Independent media, we've really got an opportunity here. I mean, obviously you were very well known well before we started this, but even when you appear on other shows, they've got a segment for you. Right. You've got to be like sound bites and all that kind of stuff. For you to be able to be giving the general public this type of I refer to it as a college lecture level dive into this information, it's opening people's minds to the goings on and the behavior of these type of political figures that we've never had before. So,
well, thank you for that. Thank you for giving me the chance to do this.
Hey, I couldn't do it without you, Charles.
But let's make this type a little smaller, and we'll get rid of the just move it up a little bit. There we go. So here's something that we're going to do. I'd like us to do, Jason. I'm asking you sort of on air if we could do it. But this first one is done by Mary Fanning. This one here. And this is a story that is outrageous.
Oh, Gulf Tainer, yeah.
And we could get, I think, Mary Fanning on the show. I did a radio.
Is this Florida or where is this?
Yeah, Canaveral. So there's a story about this. My brother sent me this Abraj group here. Okay, the Abraj group created a fund. And apparently now it was in the Wall Street Journal somewhere that I think the Wall Street Journal, that the Gates Foundation and others are questioning the finances of this fund. And I remember the name Abraj, and I remember this story, but you know, the Abraj group gave money to the Clinton Grifter Initiative in 2012. Then they get a 35-year lease deal, sweetheart lease deal, and they get hundreds of millions of dollars. And you know, this just reeks. And Jafar is the infamous father of Saddam's nuclear weapons program.
Yep.
I mean, it's as if, you know, the same people who organized the Indian state dinner for Barack Obama were that couple, what was the name, the Salahis?
Oh, and they snuck in or
they
something
snuck
like
in,
that?
you know, and they get their picture, selfie with Joe Biden. You know, that team is organized protecting our security. You know, we'll put them in charge of that. You know, we'll let Hillary operate her homebrewed server with Uma Abedin. You know, no issues letting Uma Abedin see all the nation's secrets that go to the Secretary of State, because she's above reproach.
How did she get to work for the State Department at like age 19 or something like that?
I don't know, she's close to the Clintons.
Yeah. We've done a lot of reporting on this in the past, and even actually went to the port of Canaveral.
Oh, okay.
And there's a bunch of stuff going on there where like the cranes they were used cranes that weren't adequate for lifting the current standard size container. There's all kinds of weird stuff going on with this.
Well, but Mary Fanning is the one who's bird dogging it, and I could get her on for an episode.
It, yeah.
So if we go back into the slides, this is another shameless promotion, but if we hit this one here, this is a link to the last appearance I did with the great Utrice Lead. And, you know, this progressive radio network, it gets a fair amount of attention. And I'm very honored when I go on her show. She often has me come on and just answer questions. And they know, people on the show know that I'm not a progressive. But the discourse is for the most part, you know, very objective and deep and interesting. And Utrice Lead is originally, I think, from Trinidad. She was a long-time person at WBAI. She resists labels, but she's more left than right. And you know, she's a wonderful human being who loathes fraud and is very upset. You know, despises the Clintons, particularly for what they did in Haiti. Right. But beyond that, is not very pleased with Barack Obama either. So she defies typical logic. Right. You know, she's a wonderful person. I encourage you to, you know, listen to her show, not just when I'm on it, but when other people are on it.
And people can find that on
the internet, basically.
Yeah. prn.fm. That'll be in the presentation that we post after the show today.
Great. So then we can close out before we reach out to Fabienne. This is something that I really I've told people in the past that one of my favorite people is Thomas Jefferson, and I know that's not overly popular on the mainstream campuses today, but when you go back, Thomas Jefferson was America's first envoy to France.
Oh, yeah.
And he was given, because of his ties, he was given a questionnaire from the French government. What's happening? And so he wrote the first "What's Happening."
Yeah.
And it was called "The Present State of Virginia," or "Notes on the Present State of Virginia," and that was written in several versions between 1781 and 3. And I'm going to not read all of this, just what's in red. Here, he answered a question of, can your government be corrupted, basically.
Oh, yeah.
With money, we will get men, said Caesar, and with men, we will get money, which is the essence of the Clinton machine. And then this is written, looking forward. They should look forward to a time, and that not a distant one, when corruption in this, as in the country from which we derive our origin, England, will have seized the heads of government and be spread by them through the body of the people, when they will purchase the voices of the people and make them pay the price. This is written in 1781 to 1783 by a true revolutionary who had much to lose, who was the author of the Declaration of Independence.
But wait, let's deconstruct that a bit into plain language. So what he's saying there essentially is that as the country grows and gains money, money will corrupt the government and...
Right, so in this time frame, America was chiefly an agricultural economy. Manufactured goods were made in England and imported in, and he was looking forward to a dramatically different period where maybe he didn't envisage industrialization precisely, but he imagined a government in this new construct where all men are created equal, et cetera, with, there's a real balance of power, there's no monarch, where we would be corrupted and where these three branches of government would be subverted. Does that sound like, he was seeing pretty clearly the period 2015 to 16 or the period 1988 to 2016? I mean, this is, when people say you shouldn't study history, that's a step away.
Who says that?
Well, lots of, Yale, Harvard, Princeton.
You should not
Yeah,
study?
because, a lot of people say, why bother with history? That's irrelevant. What matters is the present.
Wow.
Which is really stupid.
Yeah.
But that's what some people say. The other thing is that, this is, I think, relevant to the work here, with important work that Crowdsource The Truth is doing. John Adams was asked to defend in the Boston Massacre the British soldiers who had fired on the crowd. And it wasn't a popular thing to do. But famously he said, this is one of my favorite quotes, "I will enlarge no more on the evidence, but submit it to you, gentlemen." In other words, here are the facts.
Right.
Facts are stubborn things, and whatever it may be, our wishes, our inclinations, or the dictates of our passions, they cannot alter the state of facts and evidence. Now, he didn't know, if we go to the next page, he didn't know about that.
This?
Yeah, which we might want to play.
Oh, right. Hang on. Sorry, it opened on the other page here. This is a classic, Charles. I think people will really enjoy. Your debut animation appearance.
If we go to the next page, he didn't know about that.
Oops. This?
Hey, Mrs. Bill.
Which we might want to play.
Hello,
Oh, right.
Charles. I'm writing work-related
Oh, hang on. Sorry, it
emails
opened on
to
the
John
other page
Podesta.
Is this the Chappaqua Data Center? Where's Brian Pagliano?
You've got mail.
Maybe it's from Puma Aberdeen. Oh no, it's from Trey Gowdy.
We had two hearings. The ARB nor the previous congressional investigations had access to your emails, did they?
Didn't you already turn over all those emails?
I don't know what you're referring to.
Maybe you better clean it with this. Oh no, Mrs. Bill!
That was some weird shit.
So that was some frivolity, and I think what we can do now is prepare to meet a new friend.
Yes, of course. Our good friend, Fabien Chalandon. Now, Charles, correct me if I'm wrong, but we have a international guest joining us now.
We do. We are honored to have my great friend of now 3 decades, believe it or not. We have been creating trouble around the world for at least 3 decades that we can admit. And so I'm honored to introduce to the Sunday with Charles and Crowdsource the Truth global audience, one Fabien Chalandon. Fabien, welcome to you, coming in from somewhere in Japan at an undisclosed location. Why don't we begin this portion of the show with just you saying something about your background and qualifications and activities in your own words. And welcome.
All right, well, thank you very much, Jason. Thank you very much, Charles. I'm happy to join Crowdsource the Truth show, which I've been following for quite a while and admiring the rather incredible job you both have done. And I think as a viewer, I have to thank you for that first. As far as I'm concerned, well, I'm a bit like Charles. I spent quite a number of years in investment banking in France, in England, in America. I also managed a few companies, even managed a family office. And I'm semi-retired now. That means I have some time to investigate matters which I think can be of relevance. And the reason I'm doing that is that I've been also involved on the side of politics. I worked for Mr. Chirac during his presidential campaign in 1994, and then I co-founded and co-managed a think tank in France, which actually was the first political independent think tank created in 1996, and which main job was to break taboos. And we are a bit in the center of that approach with Crowdsource the Truth. This, in essence, with this sort of two-folded view on things, business and politics, that I've been approaching Charles' work, which is incredible, which he has started single-handedly, and I can vouch for this because in 2015, Charles contacted me to raise my attention to this Clinton Foundation issue. I can't say I was a skeptic because I've been knowing Charles for a long time, and I know when he starts stirring a pot, it's serious. But I was actually interested and even very surprised to discover that there is a French angle to it. We call it The French Connection, which is a well-known film in the US. So I think it sits in the Congress Library today. There is, in fact, a very big French input to that whole Clinton Foundation issue. Oh, sorry, I think I'm losing you.
No, we're still here.
Can you see me?
Yes, yes. We've actually created a French Connection graphic just for you, Fabien. I'm showing that right now.
So basically, again, I would like to thank you, Charles, for this incredible and remarkable work you've done. And to finish on my presentation of what I've been doing, both Charles and I have worked probably close to 15 years together. We've been through a number of nice but also difficult business issues, some of them being close to hell. Basically, we know what we're talking about when it comes to fraud. And we've gone through together quite a few. So that's why, I thank you both for the incredible work you've done in putting this whole thing public, which in essence is what has been achieved now over the past few months with your show.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Fabien. So Charles, should we get right back into the slides?
I think so, if we can.
Yes, absolutely.
So Fabien, as usual, you're being a bit modest, and perhaps you know, some of the projects that we tackled together that maybe are worth the general public knowing about. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the work that we did in France with Madison Chart Energy, because I think that's an interesting story, which was really, you know, a project that was very difficult. We went from, you know, great promise to near disaster to ultimately making a decent amount of money in probably drilling for oil and gas in France itself. So
yes, I mean, France is certainly not known as the next OPEC country, and even 20 years ago when we started this venture with a US company, but it has some oil, especially near Paris, especially near Bordeaux, and especially in the sort of southwestern part near the Pyrenees. This is a venture which Charles and I put together, what was 1996, if I recall.
right.
We raised some money for about $15 million, if I recall well. We had a team of Americans who were very experienced not only in oil exploration, but also in exploring oil in France. They had quite a good track record, and that's what attracted us too. So basically, we raised the money, bought quite a few drilling rights around on the sort of eastern side of the French Parisian basin, so east of Paris, and we started drilling. And as usual in this type of business, things never goes the way you think it should go, and it never goes the way any way you would expect. And to come back to some of your key questions, you know, there's what's happened, what should have happened, and what has actually happened. And that's exactly the same rationale could be applied to this venture called Madison Chart. So basically, we spent all the money we could have, and basically got nothing. And we just had enough money to drill the last hole, but needed a bit more. At the same time, we discovered that our partner was skimming the company, which is not good. So we had to devise a rather extreme strategy, which was to threaten to get the company to bankruptcy court, to extract ourselves from our American partner. And that threat alone was sufficient, with another threat to actually go into criminal courts as well, because that was criminal. To actually force out.
You said someone was skimming from the company. Did you have a Bush family member involved in that?
That was a different project.
Sorry. That's not one. That's another one. No, that's another one. That was the next one.
Right. We're not going to be talking about that one, Fabien.
But actually, technically I can, but it's okay. So basically, we forced our partner out from the management. We were controlling the company. We therefore were able to raise some money. Then we drilled the last hole and then a few others, and we found oil. And that obviously turned around the company. And then our partner, who did the stupid mistakes of going public, ended up into a weird situation whereby his only asset and the only cash flow he could get was the cash flow from the French company, or his portion of the French company. Therefore, he was forced to buy us out. And that's how we exited. And our shareholders were actually very happy and since we are also shareholders, we too.
So
But as you can see, it was a very twisted route to some kind of success, at least financial success.
Well, again, it's a long time ago, Fabien.
We managed to basically, whether that return did correspond to the risk, it's another issue, because we took a huge risk and a huge gamble, but it worked. Yeah. And it was a great teamwork, and Charles and I did actually an incredible work together on both sides of the Atlantic to get all the pieces of that puzzle back into the right place and the company moving.
Yeah.
That's, Charles, that would correspond to your recollection of this deal?
Well, I think, yeah, I just add that one of the, just to give you the rough sense of it, what Fabien was able to do with this family in France is we purchased the assets, the small remaining assets from the Rothschild family, and they gave up on the project, and we started with 27 barrels a day from memory of oil, which is not a lot. And when we sold it, we had gotten to 2,000 barrels a day, which is, at today's oil prices, we would be very happy. But prices went crazy. To get this done, we had to do basically a 100% debt finance acquisition, which we did. And it was just one of these things, as Fabien said, what should have happened didn't happen.
Right.
But in the end of the day, profit happened, so we were happy.
There you go.
So Fabio, one other thing that we spent a lot of time on this list, there are many, we could talk forever, but you were instrumental in helping us get the Irish buyout fund up and running, and that was the first institutionally backed by international investor buyout fund that came together in 1997. But one of the things we did out of there was there was an investment that we did together where we bought a distressed company that had a big Irish presence. It was an international company for virtually nothing. I forget what we paid exactly. I want to say it was like $4 million. It had been in bankruptcy and problems or whatever. And then Fabien and I got together and we had a good external manager. And that was great fun too, Fabien. That was a French-based company.
Company's name was Treason. It was one of the three large weighting companies in the world. It's still there, it's still well known. It had an incredible big market share in France, but also in the UK and to some extent in the US. But it was badly managed. As you said, went bankrupt several times. It was actually managed by Mr. Tapie, who was well known for being scavengers of companies. Breaking them up, taking the good bits for him and leaving the rest into bankruptcy courts. And he became a minister under Mr. Mitterrand, member of the government, therefore. While being a minister, since he was not taking care of his companies, most of them went south. So we, at that point, picked up Treason for something close to the asset value, and we had to restructure it. We brought in something totally incredible for French people, an Irish management, two Irish gentlemen who didn't speak a word of French, which didn't make things easy, but they both had in-depth experience of managing white good companies in the US, which was essential at that point to turn around the company, and they did a remarkable job in doing so. Yeah. We exited into a US listed company, which name I forgot.
Measurement Specialties.
MSI, Measurement Specialties, yes. And then they resold it to the Chinese supplier of electronics that go into these weighting machines a bit later. But basically we did a 55% internal rate of return over 6 years, which is not bad.
Quite good, as they say in French.
Très bien.
So Fabien, just to summarize, I mean, you're frequently a contributor to media platforms in Europe. You've written columns and articles and, spoken, and you're very modest about this, but I see that thread on your jacket there. I think you might have won a certain award in France that's important.
No, I received the so-called Légion d'honneur on the personal list of President Jacques Chirac. That's correct. I don't know why you should ask him.
Well, I did not. But Fabien today is, you know, he's involved in a number of important whistleblowing projects. He travels between France and Japan, but you're spending the bulk of your time in Japan. And with that, I think what we might do is go to the next slide, where what have we been doing, Fabien? And I'll do a little bit of the talking here just to introduce it. We've been going country by country to compare the United States to various countries, to give people a sense for how uneven the distribution of economic results is around the world. People have this, the globalists in particular like to think that all countries are, big countries are all more or less the same, but in reality there are very stark differences, as we've seen in previous presentations. So what we do here, Fabien, to make it as comparable as possible, we have to go, the most recent year we can pick is 2015, because we don't have good comparable data across the mass of countries that we're talking about any later than that. And we like to start with the idea that if you're going to have economic growth in a country, it starts with its population growth. If you have, you know, very slow population growth, it's going to be difficult to achieve, particularly if it's a mature economy, rapid economic growth. So to begin with, and we just are doing comparative size, France, I think, might be the 20th largest country in terms of population at this time frame. But even so, still, it's a fifth the size of the American population. So when you're trying to come up with a big market to serve, and your population's only a fifth the size, that's going to be tough. And also because of a variety of factors, the median age in the United States and in France is very high. What that means, we see across country after country, is that as the median age of a country rises, its consumption patterns slow. People, as they age, spend less on consumption, generally speaking. So one thing that really always shocks me whenever I do this math, using UNCTAD, which is the UN, whatever it is, database, we're able to get good data translated to dollars, breaking apart GDP into components. And the French propensity to consume is lower by a significant factor per person than it is in the United States. So in the United States, because we borrow so much to fund consumption, which is bad, we spend $38,000 a person on consumption in the United States. France, a large market, only spends $21,000 officially. Now maybe that's because people are buying stuff in France, not on the real market, or who knows. But
there is one reason for that, Charles. You know, the state takes half of whatever amount is earned.
High taxes.
Right.
Taxes and social security payments. So.
Would you like, as you know, we can help France out, would you like me to arrange to give Manhattan and New York City and maybe even New York State back to France?
Sorry?
If we gave New York City and maybe even New York State back to France, you know, then we'd have a whole bunch of people who are happy with really high taxes all living together.
Right, yeah. But New York high taxes, I mean, are relative compared to France. Okay? So, I mean, for New Yorkers, you know, New York taxes would be quite low compared to France.
Well, you know that...
If you look at the total social security and tax levied by the government, it's about, it's one of the two highest in the world. I think now it's even higher than Sweden. So it's #1 in Europe. And it's about close to 52 or 54% of national income.
That's pretty high.
Yeah.
I think so. I think so. Yes.
Yeah, that's not going to happen.
So at that point, New Yorkers would leave, I think. At that point, New Yorkers would leave New York.
Yeah.
That might be a good thing. So then, Fabien, what we do what we're trying to demonstrate is that the countries that seem to be populated at high government level and elite level with people who are globalists tend to be countries that have large exports compared to the size of their local consumption. So you see in the United States, our exports are large at $3.7 trillion, but our consumption is 12.3. So exports are only 30% of internal consumption. The international market is relevant, but it's not like, without it we can't survive. Whereas in France, it's 54, your exports are 54% of your local consumption. So you could, it's easy to see why French government, French elites would say, yeah, globalism, not a bad idea. In particular, France is on the Security Council. France is already well established around the world, a leading country in many places. So globalism is going to make more sense in France than it's going to make in the United States. Letting everybody into the global tent. And then the other thing that I've noticed, doing this for many countries, there's a great chart that looks at the capacity utilization inside the United States, and it shows that our capacity utilization is probably less than 80%. So we have, using long time series data, it's not shown here, we're operating at only less than 80% of capacity. If you're at less than 80% of capacity, why would you invest? I mean, you have a lot of spare capacity. You don't really need to invest. So we're investing, our total investment, our hard investing in goods and capital goods, capital projects, is only 19% of our consumption, whereas in France, it's 41%. So that can mean this investment includes state-sponsored investment and private investment. This can mean there's bad, malinvestment in France. It could also mean there's not enough investment in the United States in, let's say, public works. But it places a French company at a competitive disadvantage. If you've got high taxes, low internal consumption, a reliance on export markets, a need to invest a lot of capital, it's going to be tougher to serve the global market than it would be from a U.S. platform where you're serving the U.S. market first, earning high profits on that, and then sprinkling around to France and other markets. So it's just useful for our viewers to see the differences. And what we do, I'm not whooping up on France, Fabien, I'm just trying to many of our listeners are not terribly good with numbers. So to make it easy for them to go through all this stuff, when you see in the comparison slide a red number, that's bad for France. Urban concentration, I was surprised to see this, Fabien, that the United States, 81%, 82% of our population is based in cities, and France is 79.5. I would have thought it would be higher in France than it is, but evidently not. It's not that different. But what is different is the number of doctors you have per 100,000 people is much higher than ours, and the number of hospital beds for some reason also higher. Now that could mean that you have a big social bureaucracy in the public health system. It could also mean that maybe we have too few doctors and not enough hospital beds. I don't know. But I found that interesting.
The truth is probably a bit in between, because obviously I think America does not have enough doctors, especially generalists, from what I've read. It has too many specialists compared to generalists, and the generalist function is essential. In France, we probably have too many doctors, but they are not present in insufficient numbers in certain cities, or most importantly, they are not present in enough big numbers in the countryside. And as far as hospitals are concerned, we obviously have too many hospitals. It was even worse a few years ago, because now the hospital system is currently being restructured, and a number of local hospitals were barely surviving, and more importantly, were becoming dangerous, because if you take, for example, a maternity, if a maternity gives birth only twice a week, the experience curve of these doctors and nurses is not enough, and it actually becomes dangerous for the patients. So that's why you need to have an experienced set of nurses and doctors to have a high level of activity, and local hospitals therefore must disappear, or at least be restructured on certain number of specialties. Each one has a specialty, but a local hospital cannot cover everything, and that's one of the problems in France. So I'm not surprised by these figures, and adding insult to injury in France, also, hospitals have a layer of bureaucracy which is way too high, with people who don't work enough, and most of them are actually civil servants, and for years governments tried to restructure them, but it's been a very slow process. They're absorbing too many resources compared to the actual resources going to the medical practice. Sorry for that.
That's great, Fabien. So just in the bottom here, we put the sources, so you can look at this at your leisure. One source is the UNCTAD database, and the other source is the CIA World Factbook, that's an index of all of them. The CIA World Factbook, I'm sure, the public edition is not as detailed as the private edition, which of course I've never seen, but people have told me about it. But it's a great resource.
Of course you've never seen it, Charles.
I have never seen it. So what we might do, Fabien, is jump to the next slide, which here we talk about how Unitaid came to be. And I'm happy to navigate through this unless you want to do it. Either way.
Please, since you did write this chart, it's probably easier for you to comment it, and then I can add anything you think of relevance to what you've done.
Great. So Unitaid, it's important to understand that Unitaid, which is a large organization, came into existence, into formal existence, 3 years after the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, PEPFAR, and 5 years after the Global Fund to fight AIDS, etc., were in being. So this thing came together in 2006, and there are various schools of thought as to whether it was actually needed when it came together. There are critics who say, PEPFAR was having difficulty, Global Fund was having difficulty spending the immense amounts of money. I think in the early round of Global Fund, it was $15 billion they raised. And PEPFAR, Global Fund, was, I forget what it was exactly, but it was an order of magnitude, 10, 15 billion for that, and PEPFAR was another 10, 15 billion. Unitaid, when it first came together, was another like 300 million a year. So some said, well, why do we even need this? We're having difficulty putting this all together. And it came together under French sponsorship by a man called Philippe Douste-Blazy, who himself is a doctor. I believe he's a heart doctor, isn't he? He's a cardiologist, I think.
So yeah, you've been
Philippe Douste-Blazy.
Jason.
Can you hear me?
Mr. Douste-Blazy, yes.
Yeah, I
Mr.
think
Douste-Blazy. He's a former doctor,
right,
and a politician.
Right. So he became the first, I think, chairman of Unitaid, while he was also serving as French foreign minister, I believe, for a short period. So
actually, well, for a year and a half, which is quite unusual.
Yeah, and as a medical doctor, and as a powerful politician, he should have been able to see the flaws here. And the chief flaw that we're going to dwell on in coming minutes here is that as Unitaid was coming together, the idea was that the monies that flowed into the Unitaid coffers would be then turned around and sent only to organizations, they called them implementing partners, that had already been established, were already doing good work, were already serving the poorest countries in the world, and that all the Unitaid money would go not to overhead, but just to incremental projects that these implementing partners couldn't do. That was the thesis. And the biggest initial recipient of Unitaid largesse in 2006 to 2009 was an entity that didn't exist, the Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS Initiative from 2006 to 2009.
Charles, I understood that Unitaid had something to do with charging like $30 to every person who flew from the United States to France. Is that incorrect?
So
no, it's not quite correct, actually. It's Mr. Deux de Blazy, backed by Mr. Chirac, I have to say, raised an interesting idea, which is to tax a very small amount of dollars or euro on every traveling ticket, plane ticket bought.
Mm-hmm.
It's called, now there's a new term for that, it's called a micro tax.
Mm.
Micro tax is a tax you don't see, that you don't feel, basically, until it hurts a lot. So this was a very unfortunate idea because it could probably give new ideas to a number of people around the world, okay, or a number of governments around the world. And that concept of micro-tax was actually implemented by France at the end of, it was voted by the parliament at the end of December 2005. It was then later adopted by, I think, Korea, if I recall, and maybe another country, but it ran out of success quickly, thank God. Yeah. The problem is that France is the country which raised the most out of it and basically became a 60% funder of Unitaid. If you look at the figures overall from 2006 to today, France has funded around 60% of Unitaid. And Unitaid, especially in the early years, became the major source of funding for Clinton Foundation and its entities, and we probably will go into that, Charles, but if you look at the annual reports of Unitaid, there are at least 6 or 7 different names used for the same entity, so there's a problem.
That's the way the Clintons like to do it.
that's right. That's how they roll. So if we could go back into the slide there. So this, if we could hit the Amazon link, we've had this up before. I would have brought this book in, and I don't know, Fabien, if you've had a chance to read this book.
Power in Numbers.
I'm started about, I'm about 20 pages in, but I'm finishing off first a detailed timeline, which runs into about 60 pages, which is currently in French, which will be later in English. And it's a timeline which addresses all the issues surrounding the Clinton Foundation, including the political potatoes you have currently, for example, the FISA document, the FBI behavior versus the Clinton Foundation, etc., etc. And as you know, I'm quite thorough, so that's why I'm putting this together, because it provides then an instant document to go back to when you are asking, questions about how events unfolded and what kind of sequence they unfolded. But also, it gives interesting leads into further questioning of how this whole thing happened, should have happened, or actually happened.
Good. Well, so this book, Fabien, and just for Jason's benefit and our viewers, it's really worth reading because it came out, I believe it came out in like January, February timeframe, maybe March 2010, just as events that we will shortly discover and discuss were being played out, which is to say, just as the Clinton Foundation was, in I think our view, illegally reorganized. Likely with the knowledge of the Obama administration's Department of Justice, IRS, and other regulatory authorities. So it's I think as this plays out, it's really going to raise a lot of eyebrows, not simply in France, but in the United States and around the world, why so many different famous people got associated with a rank fraud, and rather than disciplining the people and stopping the fraud, they decide, yeah, we'll just cover it up and give it even more money. So that's never a good story. So if we go back into the slides, we don't have to hit the one on the annual reports or the regular financial and operating reports, but it's worth hitting this detailed board minute resolution link here. And Fabien, I know, has been, if we go down the page a little bit, Fabien's been through here in excruciating detail. You could hit any one of this, but you hit this one here, please. This gives you a sense of what, the French and Philippe Duplessis were pretty well organized. This is an authorization around Thanksgiving time 2006 to give a whole bunch of money to something that didn't exist, the Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS Initiative. There's no such entity. But Unitaid had a board meeting where a bunch of famous people decided that they were going to allocate, how much money do you see there?
45 million.
And then another
81 million
in the following year. All right? And it says the lead recipient of this money are suppliers, right? So drug companies. So maybe Ranbaxy, the crooked drug company that was under investigation starting around now, and that people should have understood was a crooked company, and that ultimately paid a $500 million fine. There you go, Ranbaxy. There's their company car. Their driver, Wild Bill. So if we go back into that resolution, if possible. Yeah. Next one. Here. I think in the next page, if you scroll down, it issues some, next page, I think. Yeah. Conditions. I don't know how this went into French from there. It's interesting. So,
you speak
it
French.
has. I think I can read this. I think what this is saying. This is in French. It's interesting. They're trying to confuse the English reader. What this is saying that the conditions giving this money are. It's contingent upon Chai entering into proper legal arrangements in every country where they're going to do this, which they didn't do, because they couldn't do, because they didn't exist.
Maybe they can't read French either.
But no, it's the kind of thing I know from dealing with Fabien, not just how Fabien works, but we've done a lot of work together in France, that when you enter into agreements that have to work across a large number of countries, including France, you've got to be very good about it. If you're going to set up, a subsidiary of Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS Initiative in a foreign country, generally what you have to do, laws are different, is you have to represent in that foreign country to some authority that you are a subsidiary of a validly organized and operated charity. And somewhere in the file in France and Switzerland and elsewhere in these countries, there must be these false representations with signatures on them that are probably notarized. And in France, they take notarization far more seriously than we do in the United States.
Well, I was going to say, in my experience, France is generally very organized, and usually people are super into sticking to the rules.
Right. You would agree with that, Fabien?
Can you hear us?
Yes,
there?
yes. No, yeah. But I wanted to interject a bit on the issue of what you call the board minutes. In fact, the major issue is that at least between 2006 and 2010 included, Unitaid sent $297 million to an entity which doesn't exist. So that's a problem. Okay? And it's a big problem, as we say in French, big problem. And it has to be justified. And now we can go back into the issue of why we think the Clinton HIV/AIDS Initiative, Inc. didn't exist. There are plenty of evidence for that. And there's also a merger into the Clinton Foundation, which was supposed to have existed but in fact probably didn't existed, even if it was actually properly registered in Arkansas. But you know, the company which was merging, the Clinton HIV/AIDS Initiative Inc., was never liquidated, and the merger agreement was therefore never executed. So there are plenty of legal reasons to think that this entire issue of merger was botched up and to say the least, a big mess. Now, the problem is we also have the same big mess at Unitate, because you know, and Charles and I have been doing due diligence in companies, and for a number of occasions, and sometimes we ask lawyers to do the legal side, sometimes we do it ourselves. But you know, we are experienced enough to immediately see if a company is well managed, looking at the board minutes, looking at its contracts, and looking at the way it implement any conditions attached to the implementation of the contract. Now, just looking at the board minutes over the period 2006 to 2010, December 2010, there are, I guess, I say I guess because I'm not sure, which is a problem, big problem. Okay? Because Unitate, what I forgot to say, publishes its board minutes or extracts of resolutions or both into its website, and it has a policy of being totally transparent. As you're going to see, it's not exactly the case. Out of 15 board minutes over that period, there are, if I recall well, 8 missing. So it's more than half.
Wow.
Okay. Also, you should know board minutes are numbered. I've chaired a few companies, including a few public ones. So I know, you have to number the board minutes to avoid forgeries. Okay. Now, 2 board minutes have the same number at Unitate, which is a problem. Yeah. Some board minutes are not even numbered, and a bit later, I think 2011, a board minute at the end of the year in December has, I recall, I may be wrong, but just to give you a sense, it has number 18, and the number 17 is in the early part of that year, and then it is followed by number 19 and 20 and 21 before you reach number 18 at the end of the year. So the numbers do not fit the chronological order, which is also a problem. Okay, normally, if you, in a normal company, if you see that, you instantly think fraud. Yeah, immediately. And I think, Charles, you wouldn't say the contrary.
No, no, absolutely. Fraud.
Yeah. A company that is not able to actually manage properly
or count,
that's already a sign that something is very wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm sorry to get into the details of this specific issue, but I think everyone, your listeners, should be interested to know that we too can actually dig quite seriously into matters of such detail, but usually the devil is in the detail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On that front, we won't go into this presentation, but we'll just say no aspersions are meant here against the great country of India or the great country of the Philippines. But the selection by Unitate of an auditor based in Manila and then based in New Delhi, the decision to pay that auditor less than $50,000 to evaluate all this work, and the fact that Unitate has no operations in either the Philippines or India just does raise a few eyebrows.
What's the normal fee you would expect for an audit of an organization like this?
Wow, this one, operations in 50 countries. I mean, today you would probably be looking at, I'm not an expert on this, but I'd say $750,000, $1 million to do it right. I mean, just plain figure.
And 50,000.
Versus less than 50,000.
Well, you got an auditor who can't count or keep the pages in order, you get a discount.
No, if it's just like 50,000, here's a pen, sign your name. You know,
wow. It's good work if you can get it, Charles.
Well, remember that Chai and Clinton Foundation are specialized into one thing, driving down the prices of drugs. So they may have also managed to do that for their audits. But that's Chai.
The audit was about as effective as Ranbaxy's pharmaceuticals, so that may in fact be true. That may in fact be what happened.
Yeah, it's an adulterated audit.
Yeah.
There's one thing I wanted to add to just what you said, because you were mentioning the accounts, Charles, if I may. As you know, transparent companies not only have accounts, and you need an accountant to do the accounts, but have auditors, outside auditors, who check if the accounts have been properly put together and do reflect the reality of the company. Well, Unitel has a very strange concept or philosophy as far as its accounts are concerned, and at least between 2006 and 2012. First, they approved in June 2009 their 2006 and 2007 accounts unaudited. They did not audit their accounts for 2 years, and then it took them a year and a half to have them put together and approved by the board. That's not good. That's not good. No. Any company that does that run into problems at one stage or the other. Then the second thing is that a bit later, in 2010, the board approved audited accounts for 2008 and 2009, and I say 2008 and 2009, and I'll come back to that. But the auditors, which you mentioned being the General Controller of the Philippines, this one is General Controller of India. India not being a country well known for its auditing practices, that's for sure. So these accounts, to these accounts were also attached the 2006 and 2007 accounts, which until now were unaudited, and they were this time audited and restated. Now, when you restate accounts, even if it's not a very big number, that means that the accounts issued before were not right. Okay? Correct me, Charles, if I'm wrong.
You're absolutely right.
Okay? So that's the second point. The third point is that they've produced for the years 2007, 2008, and then 2008 and 2009, biannual accounts. That's a new concept for companies. Instead of producing accounts for 1 year, they produce accounts for 2 years, which is strange. Okay? Usually you use 12 months as your standard accounting period. Now, apparently that's the policy of WHO and of the UN.
Biannual auditing is done by the
which
UN.
Is quite strange. And also I've discovered in that process that the UN and therefore the WHO have a special set of accounts by the UN. So it's neither US GAAP, the European,
we lost you there for a second.
AIS.
We lost you there for a second. You're saying the UN and the World Health Organization have a special set of accounting parameters?
Yes, yes, and which they use for the purpose of setting up their accounts, which is neither US GAAP, as Charles know by heart, nor the European standard, which is called IAS. So it's a third one.
It's ASS.
AS, yes, ASS. Now, I've not looked into the details of the principles behind these sets of accounts because I couldn't find it. Yeah, so I don't know exactly what are the standards used by the UN and WHO, the accounting standards they use. They should use either US GAAP or the IAS GAAP.
Well, they've got The WHWW, whatever the hell we want.
Yes.
That's a good one.
Now, somebody, since United, after a few years of going through that, I would say, on that unreasonable process of setting up its accounts, managed to set up an audit committee. That audit committee raised the issue of, why don't we go back simply to standard practices in terms of at least our accounting year and select 12 months instead of 24. So starting, I think, 2012, United finally got to the bottom of that. But, for you and I, gentlemen, it would be quite natural to take 12 months. And why on earth WHO and the UN are using 24 months is a mystery for me. And that's, I think, it's public money. It's not acceptable.
Right. Well, I think I can answer part of that question. In this time frame, if you think back to it, 2006, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, foreign currency exchange rates against the euro, against the dollar were moving like crazy. And so if you're basically a potentially crooked organization that's sending a lot of money around the world and is not using the kind of controls we would come to expect, and there's these volatile conditions, that's a recipe to steal money. You can backdate invoices, you can divert money, and so with everything else that we know about the Clinton Foundation, the Clinton charities, to see this in one of the big donors is vexing. And yet it could also be an opportunity, a point where the United States and the Trump administration and France with Mr. Macron coming here in April, and both France and the United States having an interest in promoting good governance practices in multilateral organizations. This could be good timing to put this under the microscope, to put the Global Fund under the microscope, which is an even bigger mess. Indeed, to put the WHO under the microscope. I mean, this is a good test point. If this is this screwed up, hosted inside the WHO alongside other organizations, think what the WHO books look like. Think what the UN books look like.
So where is Macron as far as his feelings about Mr. Trump?
I don't know. Do you have a sense?
I don't know either.
Yeah.
But I think, actually they're probably closer than French presidents were with US presidents for quite a while.
Wow.
Because they both were elected against the tide. Both. Macron was elected against the tide, or at least against the establishment.
And wasn't Le Pen a little bit more politically aligned with Mr. Trump in terms of her?
I wouldn't say that, because Le Pen. Well, there's Mr. Le Pen, the father, and then there's Le Pen, the daughter.
Yeah.
Now, the father had some strange views about history, especially what happened to Jews in Germany. By basically, saying it never happened. So that, he lost a lot of credibility with that. The daughter has a better appearance and therefore credibility. But Mr. Trump Mr. Trump never said he would close the borders, U.S. borders. Mrs. Le Pen did, or at least it's implied in the economic plan she has. And since she has no sense of economy, she would have managed France into bankruptcy basically quite quickly, which I don't think Mr. Trump would, because he's been running businesses. Mrs. Le Pen has never run any business.
And Fabienne, I'm sorry if this is a little bit unrelated to our general discussion, but how would you say the average person in Japan feels about President Trump? I would think rather positive, his good relationship with Shinzo Abe.
It's, there are, at least, I would split that in two. In the university circles, which obviously my wife and I are seeing a bit more because she's a university professor here in Japan. There is a rather high degree of skepticism, which is biased by what you would call in the US fake news of the mainstream media. And some of them know what I'm doing with Charles for quite a while on this issue of Clinton Foundation and fake news. So when I explain to them what's actually happening versus what may have happened in their mind or should have happened and hasn't happened, they actually, discover new things which they never thought about because they don't know. So there's a high degree of manipulation and disinformation because of the mainstream media in the US.
Might call that faux news.
The man in the street wouldn't be really, an opponent of Mr. Trump because Japan is a nationalistic country, whether you like it or not, and it's not an aggressive country, but it has a high sense of national identity and does not want any immigration. That's very clear. Okay, and it's highly controlled, and I can vouch for that because I'm a foreigner. I'm a gaijin in Japan, and I can measure exactly how they control it, and it's with a tight fist.
Well, but at least you got kaiten sushi there, so there's that.
Yes.
So I'm mindful of the time. We've been going now for about an hour.
Yes.
And we've discussed in red here. Sorry.
No, sorry. We wanted to mention Cour des Comptes, no? Well,
yeah, we're getting to that. We're getting to that.
Oh, you're getting okay. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. So here we have in red, and most of our viewers know all of these points because we've done multiple shows. But for the new viewers, we summarize the many diligence failures that the French and other donors must have made once they made a commitment to continue supporting Unitaid and let Unitaid give money to this entity that didn't exist. Unitaid was only supposed to give money to lawful charities that were actually organized and operated. They were supposed to reach the poorest of the poor nations. They weren't supposed to go to Massachusetts. They weren't supposed to go to London.
Is not a poor nation?
No, I mean, it's got other problems, but but the way, if you read the organization documents of Unitaid, which are on file, and the various resolutions, a very small percentage is allowed to go to, like medium low income. Nothing is supposed to go to Massachusetts. It's inside the United States. So, the auditors weren't involved looking at this crucial period, 2006, 7, 8, 9, 10, when Hillary Clinton was, running for re-election as a senator and then for trying to be a president. Should have demanded an accounting of all sums out of Unitaid to the Clinton Foundation in particular, wire transfer amount, date, purpose, where did the money go? And they should have been able to check, and I know because I've watched Fabienne do it, and I've done it around the world. The first thing you do when you're talking about giving money to somebody else to do something is you make sure that somebody else can actually do it. And to be a charity, you've actually got to file a lot of paperwork. So there's no evidence the Clinton Foundation was ever authorized to do any international work, to control any activities outside the U.S., and certainly not to fight HIV/AIDS. And as Fabien said in his timeline, I'm sure we won't go through 60 pages of it, but the real name of the entity that Unitaid was in theory supposed to give money to was called Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS Initiative, Inc. And that entity was illegally organized on March 24th, 2004. And there's no proof that it was ever validly federally tax exempt or tax exempt in Massachusetts or tax exempt anywhere in the United States or tax exempt anywhere in the world. And this is the kind of thing you can check. It's a matter of fact. You have to file, you have to register. So why didn't anybody do that? Or if they did try to do that, are there any memos in the missing board minutes of board members saying, you know, we had this diligence firm try to check it out, and they came back and said, when we pulled the papers and we asked the person at the registrar for all the papers, nothing happened, because there weren't any.
Maybe they realized the diligence firm was mattress firm.
Exactly. And so, as Fabien said, there was never any merger of this entity into the parent company. There's abundant evidence that you can see, you should have been able to see back then, that there were gross violation. The headquarters operation in Massachusetts was shut down by the Commonwealth. We call some states states and some Commonwealth. Massachusetts is a Commonwealth. It was shut down on March 31st, 2008.
Why?
Because it didn't ever file any of the forms it's
So,
supposed
but
to.
why did they stop there? I mean, if Massachusetts knew that something screwy was up, why did they just shut it down and not pursue any other kind of legal?
Because Hillary Clinton was going to be president of the United States in March of 2008. She was still a leading contender.
I think Michael Smith wrote to the Massachusetts state regulator recently, and they responded that they shut it down. They shut down the Clinton HIV/AIDS initiative because it had never filed its IRS 990s and nor any of its normal documents to be filed for the preceding 3 years. That's why they shut it down.
Yeah, and you're
That's what he wrote.
Yeah, and you're referring there to our friend, and we'll probably someday do a show with you and Michael Smith, but Michael Smith is the great Australian investigative journalist, former police detective, and now you know, very determined investigative researcher who's done I don't know how many different articles in this, and he's helped, I think, excite the interest of the Australian authorities to track down what did happen to the many 100 million or so of Australian money that went towards these frauds.
He's actually called the FBI or something, right? And opened some kind of official investigation. That's amazing. That's great.
Right. Perhaps in part because of what we've all been doing together. So
wonderful.
The final thing is that there is a memo, we've talked about it before, where the internal staff in 2015, it came out of the WikiLeaks dumps in 2016, the acting CEO of the Clinton Foundation, after Eric Braverman resigned and disappeared, writes a memo saying, when we've had problems in the past with these Chai managers, but when in July 2008, Ira Magaziner, one of the guys who helped set up Chai, and the CEO of the Clinton Foundation reported in July of 2008 that $23 million had been, they say, diverted. The correct word is stolen or embezzled. The decision was in 2008, just as Unitaid sending more and more money to the Clinton Foundation, I think it was the biggest contribution in 2008, to just cover it up. To take, they say that we covered up the 23 million by taking 23 million out of another illegal fund that we hadn't disclosed to make the books work.
Well, I guess it just depends on what your definition of embezzling is.
That's right. So if we go to the next slide.
It's bad. It's very bad.
That's very bad.
Next slide.
So if we could make the type a little smaller, if that's possible. Yeah, that's great. So Fabien, do you want me to rush through this, or do you want to take this?
No, please do it. I think it's probably faster to do it, and then I can always intervene.
Okay.
Because you have your own way of describing things. Which
okay.
Different from ours.
So what I'll do is I'll just, for the listener and viewer who has not really been through this before, we'll take this pretty quickly. But what did happen in 2009, once Hillary Clinton got stuck in as Secretary of State, and while I would say she's evil, Lois Lerner, who was a disgraceful individual who sat on top of the IRS department that overlooks charities, while they were beginning to start a process of persecuting, it is alleged, conservative-backed charities, the illegal reorganization of the Clinton Foundation started. So on the 29th of September 2009, the Clinton Foundation created an entity with the same sort of acronym that sounds similar to Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS Initiative. They call it Clinton Health Access Initiative. And they use the same acronym, CHAI. When you start seeing that in a charity, you know there's a problem. What they're trying to do there is confuse people who are not detail-oriented. You hear chai, you're giving to chai. You don't ask whether it's an old chai, a new chai, non-existent chai. You just give the money to chai because it's not your money. You took it from the travelers.
Double vente chai. You don't know what it is.
Grande macchiato.
Right.
Anyway, and in this, a technical thing here that I want to stress for our viewers that happened shortly after 29 September 2009, this new chai was supposed to be what's called a public charity. In other words, it was supposed to be independent, broadly representative of the American public at large, not controlled by any family or person for life. But they appointed Bill Clinton and Ira Magaziner as trustees of this new thing for life. You're not allowed to do that, but they did it. And they then submitted this false and materially misleading application to the IRS to get federal tax exemption of this new chai. And they claimed that it wasn't a successor to any other preceding operations. And the forms are actually really rigorous. When you tick the box and say you are a successor, there's a schedule that asks all these persnickety questions of, okay, what did you do? What was the name of the entity? Where did it operate? How much money did it have? Who were the people? Did it have any problem? And it goes on and on and on and on. But they solved that problem by just saying, no, we're not a successor.
I mean, the organization of this charity is almost like a Monty Python sketch.
Right.
Like, it's not the same. It's the same name. No, it isn't.
That's right. This parrot is dead. So
it's resting.
Yeah.
It reminds me of Peter Sellers with in the Pink Panther. Is it your dog? No, right. No, it's not my dog.
It doesn't bite. The dog doesn't bite.
My dog doesn't bite.
Right. So
my charity doesn't fraud. Yes.
Yeah. So we won't go through all these links because we're already an hour and 10 minutes into it. But the IRS application for federal tax exemption, which is available, and we have found it, is purposefully omitted from the Clinton Foundation website. It's not on the Clinton Foundation website. It's not on the CHAI website. You find it in New York State. You can find it in California. You can find it in Massachusetts. You can find it in various places. The one place you're not going to find it is in where it should be, in the Clinton Foundation main portal, right?
And that's legally, they have to give it to the public, right?
Well, if you're a public charity and if you're continuously soliciting, the way the IRS hopes that the public will discipline such a public charity is to have access to all of the documents that are in real time of the charity. And if you restrict access, that's, to me, prima facie evidence that you're trying to cover something up. And here, this is, you put everything in the dark closet corner over here with the Clinton Foundation. You say, here's everything, this is my real charity, but you put your fake operations somewhere else. And that's what they did. So they've never disclosed, and this is an interesting link of the many to hit, this one here, Jason. They've never disclosed, they have a new thing that they've changed in the Clinton Foundation website. They put this thing up recently. And they say, well, in some of the states, here's how you figure out what happened. But, in our country, we've got Arkansas, and in Arkansas, if you want to be a federally tax exempt, they say, here, if you want any of this stuff, contact us, right, the Clinton Foundation, because we'll be sure that we're not going to answer your questions. But if you want to try to get it from a state, they tick off a list of states. Well, we have many, many states that start before Florida. You have Arkansas, you have Alabama, and a lot of no contact for that. And I can tell you there are big problems in Arkansas. To operate a charity, an Arkansas nonprofit corporation, not only do you have to be federally tax exempt, but Arkansas law requires you to be state tax exempt in Arkansas. There's no evidence that they ever completed validly the registration forms for that. So this is something not to dwell upon, but it's a new link that I thought we should look at. In Mississippi, however, you see this, why they want you to call the Mississippi Secretary of State's office, because when you do that, what you're going to find out is the Clinton Foundation has been disciplined 3 times in the state of Mississippi. Wow. Without fessing up to that to all the other states where you're required to tell each other state, its problems.
So why do they want you to call? That doesn't seem
Because, I don't know. I mean, the same person who suggested that Hillary Clinton should begin her campaign in a Scooby-Doo van probably was in charge of this thing.
So you call them and they say, there was no information, there is no information in my email.
Right, exactly. Sent or received.
Right.
So if we go back into it, let's see. There are just so many, in summary, so many defects that are obvious in the public domain and should have been obvious to this effort led by the French Cour des Comptes that began to review the problems at the Clinton Foundation, at Unitaid, and at this CHI in December of 2009. So just when they were doing this reorganization, right? Just when, on January 1st, 2010, the Clinton Foundation spun out these predecessor operations into new CHI, and the IRS, on the 15th of March 2010, gave this new CHI a tax exemption, a federal tax exemption, when it should never have gotten federal tax exemption. This is precisely when the Cour des Comptes began its work. And with that, Fabien, maybe you could spend just a few minutes explaining what the Cour des Comptes is, and because we don't have such a thing yet in the United States.
Now, the Cour des Comptes first is a respected body in France, and has been a respected body since it was, I think, founded by Napoleon.
Wow.
It's formed by civil servants who have, in fact, the statute of being judges. They have two functions. The Cour des Comptes has two functions. The first one is to audit public accounts, but also accounts of private entities who receive public money. As you know, in France, almost everybody receives public money, so basically anyone could be audited by the Cour des Comptes. And I'm half joking only, unfortunately. That's the first function, and they are pretty good at it. I would say they are damn good at it. Okay. Two former Cour des Comptes members are actually well known as President Chirac and President Hollande. I will not add anything else on these two gentlemen. The second function of Cour des Comptes is to advise the government on policy issues. They basically break down any type of policies, analyze it, and recommend it, and recommend to the government actions. And usually when they take a subject at heart, that means it really needs serious action. They also are pretty good at that. Now, Cour des Comptes has also limitations in what it can do. It is only competent and only has investigative powers in France, but not outside of France. Okay. So that has a bearing on our Unitaid matter, because Unitaid, as probably most people wouldn't know, that is not a legal entity. It's a program of WHO. Second thing is that Unitaid personnel and assets benefit from the privileges and what you call immunities granted by international treaties to UN personnel and assets. That means that you can't sue them. Yeah? And the way Unitaid has interpreted this clause, which could be challenged probably in court, and especially in US courts, is that privileges and immunities extend to anyone involved in helping Unitaid to implement its program, which for example, could imply that the Clinton Foundation benefits from such immunities, which is a problem.
Yeah.
At least it is my personal reading. And again, I'm, like Charles, not a lawyer, but I've read two documents which are of interest in these matters, which are somewhat contradictory. One is a legal analysis by the Hudson Institute, which is available on the internet, which breaks down some of these issues. And the other one is an interesting board minute, lengthy board minute, in relation to the creation, incorporation, and operations of Millennium, which is this foundation United created a few years ago, and where there's an extensive discussion of their so-called legal exposure to lawsuits by people whose health would be damaged by medication distributed by United. So, to come back to Cour des Comptes, when they did their audit of United, first they didn't do an audit of CHI, or Clinton Foundation, or Clinton HIV/AIDS Initiative. Their motto and their objective was to do an audit of United. And they obviously ran into problem with WHO. They were not allowed to access any documents within the UN remit. They didn't get any help for setting up meetings. So they didn't get any help from anyone to check what they wanted to check, which is basically how the French money was used by United. Now, there's also another problem, is that in terms of audits, there's the so-called unicity, principle of unicity of audit, which means that a body cannot be audited by two different audit firms. It has to be audited by one. And WHO has its auditors, very well-known auditors, as Charles noticed today again. One is the Controller General of India, and later we will see the Controller General of the Philippines, which is even better at audits, as everybody knows.
Because Ukraine was not available?
I think it's the next one in line, most probably. So, basically, Cour des Comptes did a very difficult job without being able to access some of the key documentations that would be required. Nevertheless, from what I've read in detail, they sent teams in New York, in Boston, in Washington, in Geneva, in London, in New York, in India, in Madagascar, in Mali, and in the Dominican Republic. And they met about 150 people involved with United, one way or the other. Okay. Now, and if you want, Charles, should I get into what they found, basically?
Sure.
Okay, so I'm just going to give you a quick rundown of on United, but also their conclusions on the Clinton HIV/AIDS Initiative and Clinton Foundation, which are, I think, of interest to anyone. Yeah. On United, what did they find? They found first that there was, I would call, an absence of internal and external controls. Okay, so I think it's a meaningful way of expressing there were no controls at all. And that's for the period 2006 to 2010. There was also, and I'm translating into plain English, what is actually in plain French, having, with one caveat, is that the Cour des Comptes people are masters of understatement. Okay. So, in plain French, with that caveat, the second point would be the absence of any conflict of interest, identification and resolving procedures. Right? And I'm still talking about United, not yet on Clinton Foundation. The third one would be, is actually and I just, ladies and gentlemen, just sit quietly in your respective, on your respective chairs. Yeah? Because the third one is the impossibility to assess whether prescribed drugs have been delivered with the contracted quality and safety specifications before their safe due date, and whether they're even complying with their transport and storage specifications. The implication being that nobody knows, basically, whether people who received drugs actually got the right drugs.
Or to put it in French, nobody knows what the F happened.
Yeah. Yes. I was just, and I don't know what is the policy of the show on using, let's say, plain words to describe this, but you know, that's basically serious.
Please speak freely.
Yeah.
Now, the fourth one, and again, please buckle up your seatbelts, ladies and gentlemen. It's the impossibility to establish and control whether the disbursed funds have been expensed in compliance with the original agreement with United. So basically, in plain terms, is nobody knows how the money was spent, because nobody knows how to control it.
That's quite crazy.
And the last point would be, or is, the impossibility to diagnose whether the performance claimed by the distributing partner, for example, Clinton Foundation, has in fact been realized. And some of the performance claims are in the area of, for example, the number of drugs distributed, or the reduction in price obtained, or even the number of patients treated in any given country. That's what we call, Charles and Jason, a problem, because that's the essence of the program.
Right.
And now, last but not least, is the absence of any activity and financial reporting from the distributing partners to United. That is also a big problem, we say in French. Right. Now, so in essence, you know, Cour des Comptes wrote, what the is going on?
Yeah.
And this is a very understated way of, again, raising hell.
And we're going to put this up, Fabien. You were the one who chased this stuff down for us. We're going to put this up and links, these actual reports that are in French. There's several of them. There's a first one, and then I think there's a second one, and then there's also testimony before one body or another. We'll put all those links up there.
Yeah. How this happened, before I move to Clinton Foundation, which is also interesting. At the end of 2009, it is the French Parliament, and mainly the head of its Finance Committee, Mr. Emmanueli, who asked Cour des Comptes to investigate United. Okay? While Cour des Comptes can actually decide on its own to investigate anyone, this came from a political order. And Cour des Comptes took about 1 year to investigate and write its report. And then there were hearings headed by Mr. Emmanueli, and with Cour des Comptes present, and being heard were a number of French civil servants handling the French aid system, which is mainly multilateral, bearing in mind that Mr. Trump does not like multilateral aid, and French love it, but with UNITAID, they are starting to realize that multilateral aid is actually not a good thing. Okay, so they would be inclined to think under the same lines than Mr. Trump on this matter, based on the UNITAID failure or problem alone. On these hearings we also heard Mr. Deux, yeah? And Mr. Deux was told, you better increase or put up controls, which he sort of acquiesced. I'm not saying admitted, but acquiesced, which I think in English is slightly different. So sort of reluctantly agreed that there may have been a problem. Now, obviously, Mr. Deux was either very blind or very stupid. I'll let the viewer deduct what would be my thinking on this matter. Now, let's go to, if I may so, Charles and Jason, to the Clinton Foundation. Now, just to remind, roughly, the Clinton Foundation, well, what we call in our jargon, Old CHI, which is the Clinton HIV/AIDS Initiative, Inc., created in 2004, Charles, if I recall, supposedly merged on December 21st, it was December 31st, 2005, into the Clinton Foundation, but in fact never liquidated, and which license was revoked by the state of Massachusetts effective December 31st, 2008.
Effective December, you're right. Effective December 31st, 2007, you're right.
Effective 2007, so that's the first body we're talking about. That body received $297 million from UNITAID, which by any measure is a rather large amount of money.
Not to Jason.
So, what Cour des Comptes says about all that? Basically, Cour des Comptes says that there is an absence of disclosure on its results, its accounts, and its means.
Amazing.
Talking about Clinton HIV/AIDS initiative. So in one sentence, it's already very bad. Yeah, that means that basically this body, this entity is operating in full absence of transparency and almost willingly, or clearly willingly and knowingly.
They seem to be lying about virtually everything.
Well, it's not said black and white like that, but when you say, when an audit body says something of that nature of any entity, it doesn't look good. Okay? Doesn't look good at all. Second thing, the Cour des Comptes writes is, and I quote, the absence of internal controls. The third one is the absence of conflict of interest control procedures. That reminds you something? A bit earlier on UNITAID?
It does.
Okay, so the absence of conflict of interest control procedures. That's bad. And finally, which is even worse, but as we've already noticed with UNITAID, Cour des Comptes states that they say that there is an absence of reporting to UNITAID. So that's not good either.
Yeah. So I'm almost speechless, Fabien, but what we'd like to do, we'd like to put up on the screen the numbers that the Clinton Foundation has been trying to hide from the general public about just what may have been going on with Old Chai in the time frame you're talking about. We have those numbers. So
the numbers of money sent, yes, we have that number.
So no, I'm just gonna. We put this. I don't know if you can see it. It's slide. Is this 10 or?
Slide 10 of this one.
Page 9.
Yeah.
So
yes.
I'll run through this quickly and give you a chance to absorb it, Fabien.
Please.
So basically, what this is, the Clinton Foundation on its main web page puts its quotes audits for years 2007, 8, and 9 up linked on that page, but they purposefully omit what are called combining statements for the entities within the Clinton Foundation for 2007, 8, and 9, because they don't want you to see these numbers. Okay, but we found them, and we also previously showed people how to get them. These combining statements have a column that say there's this entity, Old Chai, the one that Fabien's talking about, Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS Initiative. And they identify very precisely, in more depth than we're going to do now, how much money of the grants, these would be government grants, how much of the government grants that came into the Clinton Foundation went to this entity called Old Chai. And in the red numbers, Jason, I'll ask you, because I know you like numbers.
Yeah.
Does that seem like a small percentage of all grants?
Well, it's looking like it's close to 100%.
Right. So virtually 100% of all the grants that came in, according to these hidden Clinton Foundation disclosures, which are filed in multiple states, were probably filed with the IRS, may have been filed around the world, but are certainly not on the Clinton Foundation website. Almost 100% of all the incoming disclosed grants went to this Old Chai, because why would you give money to a massage parlor and research center out in Little Rock that's already been built? It doesn't need money, right? But this HIV/AIDS stuff, that's kind of sexy, right?
Well, the mini golf course and the
hanging
liquor,
gardens.
they're making a lot of money at the strip club there.
Right. So then we look at this. So the total amount of grants that supposedly went to Old Chai, you see in the rightmost column, $307 million of total grants went to Old Chai. And Fabien's absolutely right. Down at the second to bottom, 297 million of the grants came from Unitate, in theory. Okay, but even these numbers aren't right, because we have found evidence of grants to Old Chai that significantly exceed a total of 307 million in this time frame. Okay, so they can't even lie properly, right? I mean, and anyway, so on the one hand, we see almost 99% of all the incoming grants, by their reckoning, from governments went to Old Chai, right?
What happened to the 1.02% that was left over, Charles?
Chelsea's got to live. And then if you look at the total Chai expenses, all right, Old Chai expenses are 405 million. Wow. Now that's because these are grants.
What the hell are they doing for 405
exactly.
million?
And you look at this grant number is not the total revenue of Old Chai. There's other revenue to Old Chai, so the loss wasn't 100 million on Old Chai, but $400 million to spend in 3 years is a lot of money, let alone 600 million, right? And we look at this, and so Old Chai, this entity that didn't exist according to the IRS form that was filed December 31st, 2009, is responsible for 100% of the incoming government grants in this time frame, and for 2/3 of the total expenses spent by the Clinton Foundation from 2007 to 2009. Yet, with a straight face, the Clinton Foundation goes to Crooked Lois Lerner's department and puts in an application under penalties of perjury saying, New Chai is not a successor to Old Chai. Oh, no. We haven't done anything like this before, right?
It's a whole new scheme.
And then you go through the balance sheet, the ending cash of Old Chai was, on average, 64% of the total amount of cash in the total foundation. So it clearly was material to the operation of the Clinton Foundation. It clearly, in theory, existed, right?
Wait, what does that mean, ending cash? Is that like profit?
No, ending cash is just, when you put a balance sheet together, you know, most people, when they run something, care a lot about how much cash they have at the end of a reporting period. Fabien was talking about annual reporting. So this is when you strike your year-end balance sheet. That's when you measure you know, how well you or how poorly you did. This entity that didn't exist held 64% on average of the total amount of cash that was inside the Clinton Foundation. And we're not talking about nothing. We're talking about 85 million in total cash, 129 million in total cash. You're talking about a lot of money was inside an entity that didn't exist. So that's probably why United didn't get any information from Old Chai, and it's probably why the Cour des Comptes didn't get any information from Old Chai, the Clinton Foundation, or United, you know, on what was really going on. And then you look at, this is really perplexing. The total amount that is declared by the Clinton Foundation as having been spent on drugs, okay, is $212 million over this 3-year period. That's a lot of money to spend on drugs.
Does that include Roger Clinton?
I don't know. I don't know if that's drugs they just bought or drugs they manufactured, net of drugs they bought.
Drugs bought in a hotel room from the FBI?
Right. but you look at this, and that's a large amount of money. And when you do an audit, you know, for a charity like the Clinton Foundation that operates internationally, if you do a valid audit and you fill in your tax forms properly, you're supposed to file granular detail and stuff like this. And you're also supposed to, for all your international operations, normally you're required to provide to the IRS local currency financial statements, exchange rates, and reconcile it all back into the total. They've done none of that, right? So remember we said in the beginning, the function of United was to find established organizations, didn't do that, and give them money that would mostly go for the drugs, didn't do that, you know, and have precious little go to overhead. United gave $297 million in total to the Clinton Foundation in this period, but they only spent the Clinton Foundation $212 million, $213 million on drugs. And the Gates Foundation gave money for the same purpose, substantial money. The Children's Investment Fund Foundation gave money. Other foreign governments gave, you know, Norway gave money, Australia gave money. Lots of people gave money that didn't end up in the books. And we have the Cour des Comptes looking at this, trying to look at this, not seeing it. We have the Clinton Foundation probably during this broadcast saying, I wish we never happened. But the Clinton Foundation, you know, as a trustee, you're responsible, as an auditing firm, an accounting firm, a legal firm, you're responsible for telling the truth about a foundation like this that's out there fundraising. You can't do what they actually did do, or what happens to you? You go to federal prison, like Corinne Brown, who's now celebrating her first week. You know, she's getting ready to enjoy her first full week. So
she's there now, right?
She's in federal prison right now. I don't know where. But this is, I don't know, Fabien, if you'd seen these numbers before, but I mean, this is just disgraceful.
You know, first time, which, I mean, they're very telling, for sure. Yeah. They're very telling. And, you know, that will probably lead me a bit later when you need it into why, I mean, what basically Cour des Comptes has failed to do.
All right. We're going to keep going. We're going to close with that, Fabien, because we're going to have, I want to give you 2 more slides and then we'll get into that.
Okay.
There's 2 more.
Okay,
right. Is this 10? Yeah, okay.
This is 9, huh?
Now we're on 10.
Yeah, we're on 10, yeah. The key nations.
All right, so this is a slightly different number that they have in the Cour des Comptes report, but for the period 2006 to 2009 only, not 10 and 11. What we do here is we lay out, there's 2 types of drugs in this time frame that the money was supposed to be spent for. One, United said, we want you to buy drugs to help children who may have AIDS. Now, the concept of children having HIV/AIDS is a very dangerous concept because HIV is transmitted principally by intravenous drug use, by unprotected sex.
Well, but the parents, I guess.
Well, well before 2006, progress had been made in curtailing the transmission of mother to child.
Wow.
How? By different means.
Wow.
And so the point here is all these countries, now India is the only one that's not in Africa here, but when you think about it, you know, these are mostly large population countries. So there shouldn't be wide discrepancies between the prevalence or the existence of patients, children who need HIV/AIDS drugs, and what are called second-line AIDS drugs. Second-line, first-line drugs are the drugs that work commonly through the adult population, but there are a percentage, and it varies country by country and type of person by type of person, where those first-line drugs just don't work. And you've got to get a more powerful set of drugs, these second-line drugs. Both of these drugs, I'm told from reading journals, are very dangerous drugs. This is not like saying, why don't you, I don't know, try, aspirin's actually dangerous. Right?
This is not aspirin.
Right. And I was going to say aspirin even is a little dangerous, believe it or not.
But can I anticipate what you're going to say? Without proper doctors, just sending these drugs there does almost no good.
Well, it's not only that it doesn't do good. Most of the people who have these type of diseases in Africa, in places where there's crap water.
Yeah, no water.
I didn't use the word. Where there's the Trump word that got him in trouble. There's no electricity. The drugs can't be stored properly. There are no doctors. There are no roads. The populations are scattered to the winds.
So giant boxes of pharmaceuticals arrive and sit there.
Well, no, because these drugs can be sold in the black market. So, you ship this stuff in. These drugs actually are, though the prices have gone down, are valuable and fungible. So there's a big black market in these type of drugs around the world. And so you ship, in the first country, let's look at that one, Zambia. You ship $43 million worth of medicine into Zambia, which is, you got Switzerland up here, which is not as pristine as it once was. Zambia is down, in the sub basement to this building in terms of corruption. You ship $43 million worth of, highly marketable drugs into a Zambia, and you can be very sure that not much of it is actually going to get into the bush. But look at the relationship here. 29% of the value that went in there was pediatric drugs, 71% second-line drugs. Now look at Tanzania, where it's almost the reverse. 65% is pediatric and 35% second-line drugs. That doesn't make sense. It shouldn't be that wide a variation.
From country to country?
It shouldn't be, no. Over this long time frame.
What do you think that indicates?
What I think it indicates is where these numbers are high for pediatric, as a guess, it's a made-up number. They wanted to cover off stolen drugs. They just said, we spent that amount of money, extra money on pediatric drugs. Because you think about it, pediatric drugs for children with HIV/AIDS, it shouldn't be 65% of the drugs that go. I mean, children are, sadly, some are having sex against their will, but they're not these are non-sexually active ages. You're talking about infants to 9 in that time frame. How could you be getting HIV/AIDS from sex, and you're probably not using drugs yet, at that time frame? So it seems like a very high number, particularly when you get down into here to Malawi, 81%, Mozambique, 67%, Zimbabwe. They just look very suspiciously high. Now, also bear in mind that these amounts that we're talking about, why is 42 million going into Zambia and only 12 into Ethiopia? Ethiopia is a lot bigger country in terms of population. Ethiopia is about 100 million people. And so you start looking at this just purely from, as Fabian and I are principally numbers people, you just look at this thing and the variations don't make any sense and should raise, major red flags. And of course, none of these numbers, appear in any Clinton Foundation filings. This is from the Cour des Comptes that we get these numbers. And in most of these African countries, there's a system set up, most of the ones that are based on, and also in India, the countries that are based on, modeled on English law, all have pretty strict local requirements of what you have to do. When you set up a charity, you've got to register. If it's a health-related charity, you got to register with the health-related people. Typically, you have to set up a local, not-for-profit entity. And to pay off the government officials, and some would say, and others would say, to make sure that they're properly looked after, you've got to generally have Tanzanian directors, nationals on the Tanzanian subsidiary.